Um, So good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Torres. I just want to say thank you so much for being here this morning. So alongside me is my partner, Julia Reynolds. We will be presenting our capstone research on, oh, sorry, on assessing urban heat mitigation strategies in New York City using high precision thermal and radar remote sensing. Our work focuses on understanding how urban tree canopy structure influences microclimate, cooling access in NYC. Okay. So like I said before, I'm Amanda and this is Julia. We work collaboratively throughout our semester, combining strengths in radar processing, thermal analysis, GIS workflows, and interpretation of vegetation temperature relationships. We also want to acknowledge Dr. Kyle McDonald and Dr. Nick Steiner, whose guidance in radar physics, eco-stress interpretation, and environmental modeling informed every stage of this research. So today we will begin discussing the importance of urban heat mitigation and why urban forests are such powerful tools. Then we'll introduce our data sets, EcoStress UAV-SAR and simulated NISAR, followed by background theory, pre-processing methods, radar analysis, EcoStress-based cooling metrics, and finally, policy implications, limitations, and conclusions. So NYC faces increasing heat vulnerability, and the burden is not shared equally. Low-income communities tend to experience higher temperature, fewer cooling resources, and elevated exposure risks. To address this, we need high-resolution data that captures how vegetation cools different neighborhoods. So why study urban heat islands in New York City? The urban heat island effect consistently raises temperatures in dense cities. New York City is particularly affected due to building density, limited green space in many neighborhoods. Mapping these fine scale variations helps us understand interventions that are most needed. So we know that urban trees are powerful cooling agents. They reduce temperatures through shade, evapotranspiration, and moisture cycling. Extreme heat is now the deadliest climate hazard in the US, making urban forests an essential form of green infrastructure. So this slide shows hotspots of high heat exposure in New York City, highlighting why identifying where forests cool the city and how effectively is so critical. So previous research has explored heat vulnerability, canopy cover, and socio-environmental disparities, but few studies combine thermal and radar remote sensing to quantify the structural drivers of cooling. So that gap motivated us to integrate both data sets. So our research focuses on three main questions. One, how does vegetation structure influence cooling? Two, can radar indices like RVI and RFDI predict eco-stress temperatures differences? And three, what will simulated NISAR data, quality data be sufficient for this kind of analysis in the future? In this next section, we're going to introduce the parks, datasets, and geographic constraints that frame our analysis. So our focus was Manhattan, one of the densest urban environments in the country. It's a mix of high-rise buildings, limited canopy cover, and iconic parks makes it the most ideal test bed to examine vegetation-driven cooling patterns. We selected parts that intersected the UAV-SAR radar swath for both standard and simulated flight lines. This allows us to compare vegetation structure and temperature across consistent spatial footprints. So UAV SAR flew over New York City on May 7th and July 12th of 2022. We worked with both simulated and standard NISAR resolution backscatter data versions, which help us anticipate how NISAR will perform once it is ready to be used. So now we're going to review the fundamental science behind radar vegetation indices, and temperature interactions. So radar works by transmitting microwave energy toward Earth and measuring the return signal, known as backscatter. So backscatter strength changes depending on moisture, structure, roughness, and geometry. So radar polarization helps us distinguish different scattering mechanisms when the radar pulse is transmitted and received in the same orientation, so HH or VV. The return is primarily sensitive to surface roughness and structural features. When the pulse is transmitted horizontally and received vertically, HV or VH, the change in polarization highlights volume scattering, making these channels especially responsive to vegetation canopies. So in urban environments, this enables us to separate double bound scattering from buildings, volume scattering from trees, and very low backscatter associated with water bodies. These differences in polarization response give us interpretable signatures and land cover. So passive sensors like optical satellites rely on sunlight or emitted heat. Active sensors like radar illuminate the structure themselves. So this distinction is critical in cities where shadows, clouds, and building geometry can obscure optical signals. Another benefit of using radar is that its active sensor allows us to see vegetation structure even in challenging conditions. So this here is an electromagnetic spectrum. So radar systems transmit microwave wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum. Unlike optical satellites, these wavelengths can penetrate clouds and are largely unaffected by atmospheric conditions, enabling reliable data collection regardless of cloud cover. So next is radar vegetation indices. RVI, or radar vegetation index, captures vegetation density and volume scattering. RFDI, which is known as radar forest degradation index, captures canopy degradation, and together they help quantify forest conditions even in complex urban environments. Vegetation structure to cooling mechanism. So more biomass generally means more evapotranspiration, which lowers surface temperatures. So we expect higher RVI to align with greater cooling. However, water availability moderates cooling. Under drought conditions, tree close stomata, reducing transpiration and weakening cooling effects. This context matters when interpreting ecostress data. So what is ecostress? Ecostress is a NASA thermal sensor mounted on the International Space Station. It measures land surface temperature at approximately 70-meter resolution and captures thermal temperature variation, making it particularly valuable for urban heat studies. So EcoStress provides 70-meter resolution temperature maps at different times of day. In this study, EcoStress provided the temperature values we aligned to each park's radar index. We used the dates May 7th and July 12th to overpass to see how cooling varies seasonally. So this is an example. This is a visual of the EcoStress satellite and an example of a map that was used to demonstrate and generate the portrays of Landsat in Madrid. So EcoStress mean summer map. So this slide shows a side-by-side comparison of Central Park using UAV SAR, optical satellite imagery, and EcoStress. Water bodies are the coolest features as indicated by the EcoStress land surface temperature, which is over here. So this figure shows how Landsat varies within New York botanical gardens as vegetation structure changes. Sorry. So in our workflow, EcoStress is aligned to UAV SAR resolution and compared directly with radar-derived indices. Next, what is NISAR? So NISAR is a next generation radar satellite launched this year, and it will provide global L-band radar observations at 10 meters and ideal for monitoring vegetation structure and change over time. So this slide depicts the mission concept. So once as NISAR is operational, it will transform into how we monitor forests and biomass in urban environments. So what is UAV SAR? UAV SAR is an airborne radar instrument with exceptional spatial resolution at about 2 meters. It acts as a prototype for NISAR and allows us to capture high fidelity vegetation structure. This slide shows the Gulfstream third aircraft carrying UAV SAR. Its repeat flight capability lets us compare conditions over time. Now we'll walk through our pre-processing workflow and index calculations. So our workflow included Python processing to collaborate UAV SAR data to be compatible with QGIS, decibel conversion, vegetation index generation, EcoStress data alignment, and park masking to focus on tree park data for our analysis. So why use simulated NISAR data in the future? NISAR simulations allow us to test whether future satellite data will sufficiently capture a vegetation structure in dense urban environments. So that will also reduce urban clutter visible in UAV SAR. Next, I'm going to pass it off to my partner, Julia.
Good morning. So in this next section, we are going to examine radar backscatter patterns across Manhattan. Okay. So this slide shows resolution UAV SAR backscatter over Manhattan. Variations in the backscatter intensity across the scene reflect differences in surface characteristics, allowing large vegetated areas such as Central Park to be visually distinguished across the urban landscape. This slide shows this map shows simulated data sets in which the original high-resolution UAV SAR data was intentionally resampled to a coarser spatial resolution to approximate the expected resolution of NISAR satellite data. As a result, localized double bounce features are diminished a little bit, while vegetation patterns still remain detectable. This allows us to evaluate whether radar-based vegetation structure and cooling signals can still be observed at a NISAR scale resolution. This slide shows a zoomed-in view of Central Park and the corresponding radar backscatter from different surface types based on sampled HV backscatter values, which are most sensitive to vegetation. You can see here that water exhibits the lowest signal, approximately -34 decibels. Grass-covered areas show intermediate values around -27, and forested regions produce the highest backscatter near -10 decibels. So now we're going to look at how vegetation structure relates to temperature. Based on our indices. So this scatter plot shows the relationship between the radar vegetation index, or RVI, and ecostress land surface temperature using the standard resolution UAV SAR data. Each point represents a sampled area, a sampled park area in Manhattan, and we observe a general negative relationship where higher RVI values are associated with lower surface temperatures. This suggests that areas with greater radar-derived vegetation structure tend to be experiencing the strongest cooling effects. This scatter plot shows the same correlation that we witnessed in our previous scatter plot between land surface temperature and RVI, but it's using simulated data. We are mindful, however, that actual NISAR data won't produce the VV polarization that UAV SAR is capable of giving us. So we won't be able to generate this RVI index with NISAR data. However, this plot still shows that this index remains informative for assessing urban cooling patterns, even at this NISAR resolution, which again just demonstrates that this NISAR data is high integrity data that is able to be used for this sort of analysis. This scatter plot shows the relationship between our radar forest degradation index, or RFDI, and land surface temperatures for both this for the standard data set. RFDI captures differences in vegetation condition and structure, and the observed relationship further supports the link between healthier, denser vegetation and lower surface temperatures. The same relationship is again demonstrated here with the simulated UAV SAR data. So now we're going to shift from data to real-world applications. So New York City is advancing major climate initiatives such as the Cool Neighborhoods NYC, the Urban Forest Plan, and long-term commitments to canopy equity and climate resilience. Our findings help identify priority planning zones, track cooling performance, and prepare agencies for integrating NISAR data to assist these initiatives in expanding the urban canopy in New York City. So here we're going to acknowledge some limitations and propose next steps. So here, I want to address that radar geometry can introduce layover and what's called shadowing due to large structures such as mountains and buildings creating shadows or like black spaces behind them due to radar not being able to hit those surfaces. They kind of act as a block. And so that can interfere with the integrity of the data, especially in dense urban regions. Ecostress is also very limited by the time of year. It varies temporally, and simulated NISAR is still very much an approximation of what actual NISAR data will look like. So future directions include using real NISAR data once it's actually launched. I believe it was launched fairly recently, and adding field measurements to better support the conclusions that we've drawn, highlighting the relationship between biomass and vegetation, density, and health with increased cooling. We can do this by measuring the sap flow of urban forests and conducting seasonal eco-stress comparisons, as well as scaling our analysis to more parks in New York City. And now we are going to wrap up with some key points. In summary, radar vegetation indices strongly correlate with eco-stress temperatures. Vegetation structure is a strong predictor of cooling capacity. Radar can distinguish land cover even in complex cities, and simulated NISAR shows real promise for ongoing monitoring of the urban canopy in New York. And this work supports New York City's climate and urban forestry goals. That concludes our presentation. Thank you very much, and please let us know if you have questions.
Okay. Hello. Hello, everyone. I am Taufik Zubair, and this is my partner here, Wasiu. And we'll be presenting from flow to flow, designing such systems for urban resilience in Nigeria. And thanks to our advisor, Professor Naresh, for all the help that he provided on this project. So just starting off the background, Nigeria unfortunately experiences devastating floods every year. In 2022 specifically, they experienced the most significant, the most devastating flood with over 600 deaths and about 1.4 million people displaced within that period. The city of Lokoja that we're exploring specifically was severely affected with about 3 deaths and 10,000 people displaced due to these flooding. And there was significant loss of infrastructure and farmland that came with this. Fortunately, this is an annual situation that happens every year, and these floods threaten the well-being of thousands of residents that live there. Climate change, unfortunately, is only intensifying the rainfall unpredictability, and the traditional solutions that are there right now are just not enough. And so, for a quick background on how exactly this flooding happens. So, as mentioned, Lokoja is in Nigeria, which is in West Africa. And it is known as what is called the confluence city because it is the confluence of two major rivers. The River Niger that flows for about 20, originates in Guinea and flows for about 2,600 miles before then reaching Lokoja. And we have River Benue that originates in Cameroon and flows for about 870 miles, passing through what is called the Lagdo Dam before then reaching Lokoja. Finally, it makes its exit at the Atlantic Ocean there down below. And one key important point for this is the rainy season within this whole region that happens between July to October. This would be a major trigger point for a lot of the devastation that we see in this period. So, firstly, exploring the rainfall in Lokoja specifically, like I said, the rainfall season between July and October. And from what we're able to gather from the data, the average rainfall is about 1,300 millimeters with a lot of consecutive rainfall days. One interesting thing though is that the climate change hasn't necessarily increased the amount of rain that pours. It's actually gone down over the years. But what has happened is that it's become faster and less predictable to know, to predict the timing and just how much rain will fall. This is further exacerbated by the fact that Lokoja is located in a low-lying area, right by the, really close to the riverbanks of the confluence right there. So, like I mentioned, a major trigger point for this devastation that we see is the rainfall that happens between the July to October period. From the first river right there, the River Benue originates in Cameroon, and it has to pass through the reservoir that I mentioned earlier called the Lagdo Reservoir. What happens is during the rainy season, the water rises, of course, water level rises, and there's water that's released from the River Benue. The water that's released from the River Benue, the water level rises, and once it reaches about 91% capacity, about a lot of water has to be released. About 100 million cubic meter of water has to be released over the course of 10 to 14 days. And unfortunately, this release coincides with the amount of heavy rain that is poured in Lokoja at the same time. This is also exacerbated by the fact that there's also poor coordination when it comes to just the release, how much water is released and the timing of the water that's released, which then creates a lot of devastation that we've seen. Then we have the other river, the River Niger, which has two main rainfall points of interest. There is the Middle Niger Basin, specifically as the arrow points there. There's a Middle Niger Basin that has a lot of smaller streams that meet at that point there. And once the water level rises, it actually travels to Lokoja relatively quickly, getting there within about 2 to 4 weeks. Which triggers a lot of the flood that we see that happens during the same rainy season of the flooding that we see there. But then there's another timing of the flood that comes. This actually happens at the origin of the River Niger, traveling about 2,600 miles before it gets to Lokoja at a very relatively slow speed. But this water doesn't get to Lokoja until about December or February of the next year. And while this doesn't create any flood situations, it creates a very slow recovery period for the city, basically before the next flood comes the following year. And so all these pressures, first of all, coming from the River Niger and the River Benue, and then all the little streams there that you see teeming in through the city, creates what we call, a term that we've coined as the flood sandwich, where there's all these different pressures coming from the River Niger, the River Benue, and all the little streams that pass through the city before then creating this pressure point that we see at the city, creating the devastation that we see every year. And so we go from situations like this in June to this in September. And this kind of illustrates, this satellite image illustrates the amount of damage that comes with all that water meeting in that city. And this map as well just highlights the amount of inundation that happens with, the blue marks being just the water, how much the water inundates into the city where people actually live, creating the devastation that we see. And so, at the moment, a lot of the infrastructure that's there is great infrastructure. And unfortunately, a lot of it fails. So we believe that sustainable urban drainage systems for us is the key to create not just a solution, but a solution that lasts and that also that promotes a sustainable long-term system for this region. And so quite simply, sustainable urban drainage systems are just systems that manage stormwater using natural processes. So like slowing and storing the rainfall, like ground absorption, channeling water. And the whole point of it is that it improves water quality and also just reduces the runoff that comes with the water. And for us, it fits Lokoja because of its because of its terrain. It has like natural elevation that is able to channel water as it needs to. It is cost effective and scalable. And the fact that it also provides a lot of green co-benefits as well. And so our goal for our research was to design a such system that mitigates flood risk in Lokoja, to assess the social and environmental impacts of such systems, and develop a scalable, cost-effective such strategy. And finally, just explore the potential for implementing solutions in other regions that experience this kind of flooding as well. So I'll pass it on to Asiu for more details.
Thank you, Taufik. I will now lead us into the social insight and the technical analysis that underpins our design. While the hydrological context provided by Taufik explains how flood occurs, the social dimensions reveals who is most impacted and how communities respond. For our study, we believe that this dual perspective is important because building resilience to flood is not just about engineering solution. It's about the people, the communities affected, and the lived realities. So one of the foundational data set that we use for this study is digital elevation models. DEMs are important for our study because they provide a three-dimensional representation of terrain. And in flood modeling, elevation determines flow path, accumulation zones, and drainage potential. Also, DEM integrates seamlessly with GIS tools. And this enables us to overlay data like rainfall, land use, land cover, and hydrological infrastructure to produce accurate maps for this study. To situate our study, we created a map of the study area showing Kogi State and Lokoja at the Niger-Benue confluence. The map was created using QGIS. It involves importing several administrative boundary shape files into the QGIS environment. Specifically, we imported the Nigeria administrative boundary shape file, clipping it to Kogi State and extracting Lokoja from there. One other thing that we did was to annotate the position of our study communities on the map of Lokoja. So this box right here is where most of our study communities are situated. This land use, land cover shows the study community, as I explained in the previous slide. And what we found out is that these communities that we study, all of them fall within the blue shaded portion of the map. And this further explains their heightened exposure to flooding. Again, this is important to our studies because it shows how human activities, especially construction and urbanization, interact with natural floodplains to exacerbate flood risk. And in the case of Lokoja, rapid urbanization has encroached into the floodplains. The consequence of this expansion is that it leads to more built-up areas, which in turn increases impervious surfaces that reduces infiltration and accelerates runoff whenever it rains. This flood vulnerability maps further confirms the spatial clustering of our study area. Again, most of the study areas that we are cited are in the highly vulnerable zones. In creating flood vulnerability maps, you just have to combine several variables, including elevation, proximity to rivers, land cover, and socio-demographic data. From the literatures that we reviewed, 5 communities are identified as being the most vulnerable to flood risk in the study areas. These communities are Adankolo, Ganaja, Gadumo, Kabawa, and Sarikin Nomar. One of the things that we did in this study is to create a map showing the drainage area in the study area by overlaying community boundaries with river networks in QGIS. And as we can see, the positions of these communities here, this is Ganaja. Ganaja is like in the lowest part of the map. It's like the most vulnerable to flooding. Sarkinoma is right up here, and Adankolo is around the central Lokoja drainage area. So in August 2025, we conducted a fieldwork to understand the actual situation in the flood-prone communities. And despite being August, as Taufik explained, rainy season in Nigeria usually starts around May, and it peaks in September, October. But as of the time of this fieldwork, these communities were already inundated, despite the fact that it's not peak rainfall month. And there's a video here that shows what this looks like during the time of the fieldwork. That's Tariq Nomar. And this is Ganajar. So these are some of the evidence we gather as the impact of the flooding. So based on this observation, what we found out is that Lokoja's drainage system relies primarily on open channels, culverts, and fill retention basins. And as shown on the slide, from plate 1A through 1D, we can see evidence of eroded channels, a collapsed wall, and debris in one of the drainages. What is important to note here is that drainage failures compound the effect of rainfall and river overflow. What this means is that a little amount of rain is enough to overwhelm the system, especially in low-lying communities like Ganaja. So in addition to spatial analysis, we also did some descriptive analysis, mostly frequency distributions and cross-tabulation using IBM SPSS version 31, assessed via the Porter virtual desktop environment provided by City College. We distributed 261 questionnaires. Of these questionnaires, 250 were physical copies, and we got 11 responses from the Google form that we submitted for the study. Open-ended responses like age were reclassified because SPSS can only accept numbers. So we came up with 5 groups for age. And what stands out so strongly for us in this social demographic is that most of the respondents in our study community are in the 29 to 39 age bracket. In addition, we asked people about the frequency of flooding now from their perspective. What do they think about the frequency of flooding? Just to juxtapose that with what we've read in our literature. And again, about 60% of the respondents noted that the flood is an annual occurrence. Then we asked them about the situation of the current flooding compared to 10 years ago. And again, about 48% confirmed that the situation has been the same for the past 10 years. Then just to understand their perspective on the main causes of flooding, we asked them questions about these, and most of the respondents attribute the cause of the flooding to poor drainage systems. In terms of coping strategies, a lot of them just resort to relocating to safe areas whenever they are in the peak rainy season. So in trying to understand how the government has been helping them cope with all of this, most of the respondents believe that what the government has been doing for the most part is providing early warning information, like it's going to flood in August, try and be careful, and that kind of thing. So measuring the effectiveness of this from their perspective, 50% of the respondents believe that this early warning system has not been effective. So when it comes to personal steps they've taken over time to reduce this flood risk, over half of respondents, which is about 55.6%, reported taking no personal action to reduce the flood risk. More or less like this happens every year. When it comes, we adapt and move on. Only 8.4% of the respondents said they constructed physical barriers like sandbags, while 36% took some form of preventive action. And then we also asked them about what they feel about the drainage system, not to waste our time. What come out so strong for us is that there's no adequate drainage system across all the 5 study communities. In terms of their knowledge and acceptance of sustainable urban drainage system, there's growing awareness of that. And most of the respondents feel that we need to come up with a better management strategy to help them cope with the flood. In terms of green infrastructure to manage flooding, same is true. all of them agree that there has to be a better way. Now, because we want to work with these communities to create a solutions that will work, we ask them to give us their opinion on some of these recommendations to improve flood management and infrastructure in Lokoja. And then this is kind of very funny because if you look at a community like Ganaja, for instance, Ganaja is coming out so strongly in responding to all of this intervention, whether it's assistance from private public partners or from World Bank or for providing more relief materials. They are just open to everything that could help them cope with these devastating flood occurrence. And another thing to note is that if you look at this community, they are more interested in relief materials because for them, it's like, this is going to happen. So just help us with materials that could help us cope with these things better. So in context of our previous work in this area, what does this mean? According to a 2021 study by United Nations Habitat, if our respondent said what they do most time is relocation, people in Accra, Ghana also do the same thing. When it floods, they move to a safer area. In times of our infrastructural gaps, in times of all this drainage and all of that, a study by Liao in 2012 also confirmed this as a problem. That's with respect to systems inadequacy. When it comes to community awareness, like I said previously, there's a growing awareness about green infrastructure, sustainable urban drainage system being like the way forward to build a more resilient communities. For us, this comes at 51.2% for SUDs and 56% in support of green infrastructure. Now, one important thing to note here is that there was a study done by Bamidele et al. In 2023. His own response for acceptance of green infrastructure came in at 33.6%, which means there's a growing awareness in the openness of communities to adoption of green infrastructure. Next, I'll pass over to Taufik to lead us into the technical side.
All right. So with all the analysis and all the studies that we've done, now we need to figure out how do we design a flood management system that works for this community. So when trying to decide, what kind of design we should go with, we initially, like has been brilliantly put, the conventional drainage system is just inadequate. And so our sub principles of interest primarily was infiltration, retention, and conveyance of the water. And just this image here kind of illustrates those three different principles, infiltration being absorption of the water, retention is holding the water for some time, and then conveyance is channeling the water in whatever direction you want to take it. And so, as we mentioned, we analyzed the 5 flood-prone communities. We have data for all 5 of them, but we're only going to focus on 2 of them for this presentation because they have, like mentioned, 2 different extremes. One is Sarkinoma, a much smaller area at the very top, and Ganaja, which is towards the very bottom there, much larger area. And so to achieve this, we developed an Excel tool that would help us quickly calculate what kind of solutions what kind of results we have to get from each solution that we came with and what, based on our parameters. So starting with, rainfall, what happens when the rain falls in Lokoja? We need to determine how much of that rain is going to be absorbed by the soil and how much of it is going to will turn into runoff, which is the flood, that we see, that the water that stays above the soil. We went with about 50 millimeters depth per day and 35 millimeters, 15 being the average heavy rainfall that we saw within a 5-year study period for over the past 5 years, 35 being the worst case scenario that we've seen within that 5-year period. And then in terms of imperviousness, that is just quite simply how much soil is available, how much physical soil is available to absorb this water. And we saw that, using Google Earth, we're able to see about 50 to 90% imperviousness, which of course varies with the area density. And so, as mentioned earlier, even just with some of the studies that I've done before, just a little bit of water that came with the 50 millimeters that happened on a very small level, just for one day, was enough to create about 1,700 1,700 cubic meter volume of water on the soil that remained as runoff on that soil that needs to be taken care of. This going all the way to 42,000 cubic meter of water. So again, just a little bit of rainfall is enough to generate that. And this is the issue that we're dealing with here, based on the density, of course, based on the soil, because it's a soil class C, as they call it, and it unfortunately doesn't absorb as much water as it should. And so what do we do with this water that just stays above the soil? Well, first thing we wanted to do was to store and create a storage and discharge system. And initially our ideas came with having, tanks and underground storage tanks and rooftop storage tanks. But if we wanted to go for a sustainable option, then we have to, go for what we feel will create a long-term sustainable solution and have those ecological co-benefits that we want. And so we went with a retention pond. I'm going with an average volume of about 50 cubic meter with a depth of 2.5. And of course, this can vary depending on the location, the area, the amount of space. You can make it much bigger, much smaller. But this is just the average that we went with. And our goal was to capture 20 to 50% of the water that was created during that is basically now runoff. Once we capture that water, our goal is not to discharge this water over a period of time. We settled on 18 to 24 hours, first of all, to maximize how long we can hold this water, but also to make sure we don't hold the water too long, then where it creates, a health risk and have, just all the health risks that's come with, having standing water, having still water with mosquitoes and all those, the diseases that can be born there. So we've been able to take care of about 20 to 50%, but we still have another 50 to 80% that we need to take care of. And so what we wanted to do was create channels that'll channel this water away from these communities. After the calculation, all the infiltration and retention, we still have about 10.4 to deal with Sarkinoma and about 70.9 to deal with in Ganaja. And so to address this, we created neighborhood channels. These are just smaller channels that are able to locally convey the water away from most neighborhoods. All of them having a district capacity about 8.9 based on that small area. Of course, again, this is custom to this can change depending on the area itself. And all having a velocity about 1.08 at this size. Now, the velocity is very important because anything more than that could create a situation where there's not erosion, which now makes it, you're then creating just basically another flood. I know you're basically creating your own flood system by having that, by having a velocity that high and creating erosion of the soil there. And so Sarkinoma being a much smaller area, it only needed about 2 channels that needed to flow within that community, and Ganaja needed 8, being much bigger, taking a lot more water than Sarkinoma. And so this is a lot of runoff reduction, but there's still things we need to worry about, which is the cumulative downstream pressure, the land availability, and just the backwater effects from the river. We still have the river that's flowing. So how do we deal with that part of things? So we needed something to tie it all together. And this is why we came up with our last thing, what we call the parallel relief channel. And what this parallel relief channel does is that it is a larger, much bigger auxiliary channel that flows, it's about 50 to 80 meter cube, and that runs parallel to the River Niger, but on a much higher ground to avoid the effects of the backflow from the River Niger. And it takes whatever overflow that comes from the River Niger side of things, it channels that water maybe through the city, but it's only expected to take about 20%. This is only supposed to be about 20% of the capacity of this auxiliary channel. The other 80% will be left for the ponds and the swales that have been created within the communities to basically connect all these, to create all these urban drainage systems that we've created, tying it back to that pond and channeling the water to a much later point, where there is no one living in those. Basically, it's an available area to channel the point back into the River Niger. And so all what this does is that it creates a unifying backbone for our SUD system. And to see it more in detail here, this is another community gajujo. And what happens, this chart kind of just encapsulates what exactly we're trying to go for. So when the rain falls, some of it is absorbed, okay? We have no control over that per se, but we have control over what happens with the runoff. So once the runoff happens, some of it goes into the ponds, about 10 to 50%. that is drained over 18 to 24 hours. Another part of it goes into the swales that are channeled, and then they all meet at the relief channel that we're trying to put on a much higher ground that connects all these such systems together before finally making its final journey into the River Niger. And so what our design achieves is that it reduces runoff significantly across these communities. It lowers the peak discharge entering all of these channels. It reduces erosion slowly, but by slowing and controlling just how much water flows. It prevents backflow from using the relief channel, from the River Niger, from that confluence there. And it also creates a scalable framework and a decision supporting tool, the Excel tool that we had. It creates like that decision supporting tool to be able to quickly replicate this kind of systems across other cities. And most importantly, we're able to integrate engineering and community insight as well, making sure we didn't just build things that the community wouldn't be open with. So back to Wasif for the benefits.
Yeah, thank you, Taufik. We've explained the features of our design. Now let's talk about the benefit. On the ecological side, salts expand green spaces and biodiversity. Nature attracts other form of life. There's also improved water quality that come through the filtration process. On the economic side, when the community is safe, you don't have to spend a lot of money in controlling the annual flood damages. So that's a lot of our cost saving. And there's also the benefit of local job creation because, like you said, what we try to do is to co-create these solutions with the communities such that when we have these salt train built, the community will also be the one maintaining it, and that is going to come with some kind of incentive for them. The hydrological benefits include reduced peak discharge. Again, our system is to plan for the rain, catch it, and release it gradually in order to reduce the runoff. And then when we do this, we're able to stabilize the velocity of rainfall that comes into the study communities. So some of the recommendations we have for this is to allocate land for building sustainable urban drainage systems. The channels have to be upgraded because again, it's a kind of hybrid design. There's still going to be the engineering part while we combine our own ecological side to it. So despite all of these interventions, the drainage system in the study community still have to be upgraded. And then, like we found out, the communities are ready to design these solutions for them. There's a proverb in Africa that says, you do not shave a man's head in his absence. So this is something we're trying to do together. And then there's an improved awareness on green drainage. All of these things is happening. The people want a solution that works. And then improved communication. We also found out that our people, or let me say the people in the study communities, are more on WhatsApp channels. So maybe some of the reasons why the communities are saying they are not getting the message or they are not getting the help from the government is because of the communication channel that they've been using. So instead of using the traditional media system, tailor the message to what works for them. So more or less like they live on WhatsApp these days. So you have to meet them at that point. Yes, topic.
And to close this out, there's still a lot of potential that could come with this solution that we have. There's a lot of real-time flood management that could come, using weather forecast to be able to create a sort of remote system where you could open and close these channels and these ponds, and slow and release, just to slow and increase the release of water depending on the situation that may occur before or after. For example, we can create an automated drain down time that, where the water, where the ponds could drain down quickly or, much quicker before a heavy rainstorm comes, just to prepare itself for those, for just more heavier events. This could also be integrated with, for background, NISA and NIMET is the Nigerian Hydrological Agency and the Nigerian Meteorological Agency. This tool can also be integrated with some of their early warning systems. they have really good early warning systems, but then putting that early warning system to create a preventative system is the main gap that we're seeing here. So being able to integrate that together would be like would really, really improve the situation that we see here. And this could also be a really good decision supporting tool for rapid design replication. Like I mentioned, we have an Excel tool that is active that you could use to be able to quickly replicate this system and quickly design these things just based on whatever criteria that the city that you're trying to replicate it for has. And for more information, you can try out the hydrosizing tool. It is live. It's on Excel. And the full site visit video that we had, we only showed like maybe 50 seconds. There's a full 5-minute video that I will show more with some interviews as well. So if you would like to learn more, you can click scan the code and learn more about them. And that'll be all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Münevver, and then my partner is Aaron. I'm a little bit excited. This study examines environmental justice issues in Hunt Points, a neighborhood in the South Bronx, characterized by heavy truck traffic and large food distribution areas. Air quality in the area is very poor due to numerous diesel trucks in industrial land use and limited green space. This has led to very high rates of asthma and other health problems among residents who are mostly from low income and minority groups. And then the study maps various environmental stresses such as pollution and heat risk using GIS Pro. It shows that the estimated air pollution levels, particular nitrogen dioxide and then black carbon, closely match actual measurements from the New York Community Air Networks. The highest pollution levels are found near truck routes, industrial zone, and storage areas. The study also creates the heat sensitivity index map to shows Hunt Points as one of the most heat vulnerable areas of the city due to low vegetation, extensive gaved areas, and social disadvantages. The mapping also shows that Amazon warehouses are clustered along major truck roads. While this situation makes logistics more efficient, it increases the risk of pollution exposure for nearby residents. The study offers several policy recommendations to improve environmental justice. Can I do? The Hunt Points, a key last mile logistic and food distribution hub, endures disproportional diesel truck traffic, industrial land use, poor air quality, and minimal green space. These conditions have produced alarmingly high asthma and then other pollution-related health burdens among low-income, mostly minority residents. Hunt Point is a working-class neighborhood in the South Bronx, mostly home to Black and Latino residents. It contains one of the world's largest food distribution centers, which handles billions of pounds of food every year and is very important for the region's supply chain. However, this economic growth has serious health and environmental costs. Thousands of diesel trucks drive through Hunt Points every day, creating high levels of air pollution like fine particles and nitrogen dioxides. These pollutions are linked to asthma and heart and lung problems, and the neighborhood has some of the highest asthma hospitalization rate in the country, especially for children. These problems did not happen by accident. Past city planning decisions placed pollution in industries and freight routes near low-income and minority communities. Hunt points also experienced disinvestment and redlining, which left industrial facilities close to homes and limited community influence over zoning and infrastructure decisions. Recently, the grow-up of the e-commerce has added pressure. Last mile delivery warehouses, often near homes, have increased traffic, noise, and pollution, and made existing environmental burdens area worse. Community groups like the Point DCD and the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance are organized to change this. They use tools like community mapping, air quality monitoring, and policy advocacy to involve residents in decision-making and push for cleaner, fairer policies. Addressing these environmental challenges is critical for improving the health and quality of life of South Bronx residents. This project aims to empower the South Bronx community by providing them with the data-driven visual tools to understand and advocate for improved environmental conditions. By integrations GIS technology with citizen science, the initiative seeks to highlight the disproportionate environmental burdens faced by marginalized communities and promote equitable urban planning solutions. The South Bronx, particularly the Hunts Point neighborhood, face significant environmental challenges due to heavy truck traffic associated with the Hunts Point food distribution center and numerous last mile deliveries warehouses. These facilities contribute sustainability to air and noise pollutions, adversely affecting local communities. For air pollutions, approximately 15,000 diesel trucks travel daily to and from the Hunt Point's distribution centers, emitting fine particulate matter linked to respiratory and cardiovascular disease. The annual mean concentration of particles and nitrogen dioxides in Hunt Points is 6.2 micrograms per cubic meter, higher than the New York City average of 5.8 microgram. The noise pollutions, the proliferations of last mile warehouses has led to significant increases in truck traffic, especially during nighttime hours. Studies have shown that at several sites in South Bronx, noise level exceed to Environmental Protection Agency's recommended limit of 70 decibels, contributing to community disturbance and potential health issues. For health impact, the South Bronx has some of the nation's highest asthma rates, with children aged 5 to 17 in Hunt Points visiting emergency departments for asthma at rate of 285 per 10,000 residents, more than double the city rates. The goal is to show how data advocate and policy change can reduce health harms and give Hunt Point's residents a stronger voice in planning future. Who's affected? Is the most three groups we have most affected. One of the children, with approximately 17% of children aged 4 to 5 in areas suffering from asthma. And then low income and minority communities, the South Bronx is predominantly inhabited by Black and Latino residents who often face systematic socioeconomic disadvantages. Third one is residents near major roadways, individuals living close to highways are exposed to higher levels of pollution, increasing their risk of respiratory and cardiovascular disease. Why is it important to solve? For public health, reducing air pollution can lead to significant health improvements, decreasing hospitalizations and healthcare costs. Environmental justice angle, the solution exemplifies environmental justice where marginalized communities bear the burden of environmental hazards. Policy implications, data-driven insights can inform equitable urban planning and transportation policies, ensuring the interventions like congestion pricing do not disproportionately harm vulnerable communities. Which methods we use this? It's most we are uses the special analysis, GIS mapping, policy and literature review, qualitative integrations, evaluations, analysis framework. Literature review. I study Hans Points, our focus area in South Bronx, by reading previous studies on the impact of freight traffic, land use, and industrial activity on local health and the environmental. I use spatial mapping, thanks for my colleague Aaron's mapping, policy reviews, and community-based organization reports to understand how the neighborhood is burdened and what needs to change. Academic and policy literatures converges on this point. When freight, logistics, and the last mile housing are concentrated in marginalized neighborhoods, structural environmental justice is reinforced. Without equitability, land use, and regulatory reforms, the economic and logistical benefit will continue to be disproportionately borne by frontline communities. I have seen that strong partnership between community organizations like the Point DCD and the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance and policymakers drive real progress. For example, electric truck charging centers and clean freight initiatives are planned for hand points. By mapping errands, tracked roads, industrial zones, and asthma hotspots, our project helps show the areas with the highest levels of pollution and who lives there. This means our work can help decision makers prioritize these areas and empower local residents to take a stronger role in shaping change. I hope our research contributes to better air quality, a stronger community voice, and more equitable land use decision in hand points. Transportation justice means ensuring the transportation systems are fair and do not create to perpetuate inequality. It acknowledges that transportation affects people's lives, where they work, where they live, and how healthy they are. Many scholars demonstrate that transportation systems often provide economic benefits to some people while others bear the cost. For example, in freight corridors like hand points. Larger traffic transport goods and money to business, but local residents suffer from air pollution, noise, and health problems. The basic ideas in simple terms: procedural justice and distributive justice. Procedural justice, fair process, means that the people affected, not just large corporations and government planners, should be heard when decisions are made. For distributive justice, for fair sharing means that both benefits like jobs and disadvantages like pollution are shared fairly among communities. Asymmetric accessibility, some people benefit from the advantages of transportation like job and goods, while others bear most of the disadvantages like pollution, traffic, and noise. Urban green policies, even environmental or green projects, can worsen inequality if local people lack real power in planning. Community power and co-productions to assess these issues, residents, the governments, and transportation companies need to work together. Community voice must be part of the planning and decision-making processes. Furthermore, tools like community benefit agreements and participatory planning are ways to empower communities, ensure they benefit and participate in decision-making processes, rather than simply bearing the negative impact. Specific comparisons of past and present in hand points. When we see the beginning of the 20s, the high truck volumes, major diesel pollutions, little clean freight infrastructure. What's changing? Baseline of heavy pollutions, little target interventions. Earliest 2020 studies start 2022 show heavy-duty trucks are large contributors of particulate and nitrogen dioxide, and exposure burden is unequal. What's changing? Recognizing of the environmental justice dimensions, policies starting to target clean freight. Is mid of the 2022 and then recent time concentrate infrastructure and policy project in hand points, EV charging hub, water-based freight, local electrification roadmaps. What is changing? Shift from analysis to action, community specific interventions, freight systems redesign. I wanna give you some information. The recent times, air quality health impacts of diesel trucks in New York City, New York, and policy implications. This study shows that heavy-duty diesel trucks in New York account for approximately 6% of vehicle activity, but contribute approximately 50% of on-road vehicles, particular and then nitrogen dioxide emissions. The Bronx is breathing project, a local initiative in hand points that deploys zero emissions electric trucks and electric transport refrigerator units in the food and waste sectors. And another project is the Blue Highways program is new. 2025 is new plan to buy New York City Economic Development Corporation and the New York City Development of Transportations to shift freight transportations in New York City, including hand points from trucks to waterways. This policy not only regulates trucks, but also changes the way freight is transported, principally reducing traffic and emissions in the community. This is relatively recent development implemented in 2025, reflecting the evolving freight transportation policy agenda. 2025 announcement, the city opened an electrical vehicle charging facilities and multipurpose freight centers in hand points. This is the result of community outreach over the past decades and shift towards clean freight transportation. The transactions for heavy diesel trucks with minimal local clean infrastructure to Planet facilities dedicated to heavy-duty electric freight transportation in the neighborhoods. What was changed in recent years? Emissions for older diesel trucks remain a major burden, but data now shows that communities of color and low-income groups are disproportionately affected. There has been a shift from just measuring the problem to tackling the problem locally. For example, the Bronx is breathing project, the Freight Center electric bicycle charging facilities, and the Blue Highways plan illustrate these directions. Freight transportations, modes, and infrastructure are being redesigned. Strategies now include electric truck deployments, charging centers, and moving freight to waterways, rather than simply regulating trucks. Local community awareness and participation are become more visible. Studies and initiatives now references communities driven electrifications roadmaps, listening seasons, and the electric vehicle development plan in handpoints. Development, land use, and resilience are increasingly being considered. For example, the handpoints powerful plan mentions float installations, remeditations of former industrial areas, and infrastructure investments. Regulatory measures, special permits for warehouses in response to environmental concerns. New York City has committed to requiring special permits for new last mile warehouses developments. These initiatives aims to regulate the clustering of these facilities, mitigate traffic congestions, and reduce associated air and noise pollution in overburdened communities. Is the policy analysis. These reports look to handpoints environmental justice issues using maps and data on pollution, zoning, and heat risk, also assess for policy options to reduce inequality. And indirect sources rules to regulate warehouse pollutions, zoning reforms to reduce industrial encouragement and support fair land use, clean freight initiatives to speed up truck electrifications and greener logistics, community benefit agreements, so residents gain from new developments. Key finding and analysis handpoints. Our key findings, freight infrastructure, population overlap, health cumulative burden, procedural exclusions, community frustrations, policy gaps, enforcement challenges, community-based solutions exist but need supports, lessons from elsewhere, potential for reform. The data and analysis illustrate how freight-driven land use and logistics in handpoints intersect with environmental injustice, reinforces that without structural change to regulation, land use, and community engagement, health disparities and environmental burdens will persist. And then recommendation is last one, okay. Now Aaron will explain to you, we obtained all this data with details.
All right, thank you, Minever. Hey everyone, my name is Aaron. So our project focuses on mapping climate justice in Hunts Point. We worked with the Point CDC, which is a community development corporation. And specifically, we wanted to focus on last mile facilities and the rise of e-commerce. So before we jump straight into it, I thought I'd just explain real quick what is last mile for people who don't know. Last mile is the final step of a delivery chain. So we're really talking about the last place a package shows up. So we're thinking about Amazon. In last mile, it requires intense vehicle activity. So there's a lot of trucks, there's a lot of vans, vehicle activity. It uses large fleets of vans and trucks. And for the sake of this presentation, these warehouses are 50,000 square feet or roughly 1 football field in size. So they're pretty large warehouses. So why did we choose to focus on last mile warehouses? There has been a massive growth since the e-commerce boom. So we're really seeing more last mile warehouses. There's a clustering of them, especially in climate justice neighborhoods, is why we're particularly interested. And there's also a direct link to truck traffic and congestion because of the heavy vehicle activity. So a lot of these communities are burdened by truck traffic and these vans. So one of our first mapping exercises is we created a heat vulnerability index by community district. This data is from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene from NYC Open Data. So this map shows heat vulnerability. The way to read this map is the lighter the color, the least vulnerable your community is to heat, and the darker the color, the most vulnerable you are to heat. Hunts Point is the star, which is right over there, but City College is over here, so we're going to be focusing on Hunts Point. And I guess the takeaway here is that Hunts Point is labeled a 5 on their index, meaning they're the most vulnerable to heat. So here's a map showing land use where we used Pluto to map out how land is used in Hunts Point. To just read this map, I'm just going to explain how to read the map real quick. The purple is residential areas, so you can think of purple as houses and apartment buildings. The blue are educational facilities, or another way of thinking of them are schools. The green are outdoor recreational facilities, or parks is another way you can think of them. And then the red is factory and industrial buildings. Orange is are warehouses, and then yellow are vacant lots. So what's interesting about this map is you can kind of see how the residential areas are kind of towards the top of Hunts Point, and they're separated by this highway, the Bruckner Expressway. And then as you approach the water, you can see how Hunts Point is mainly zoned for industrial and warehouse use. And then we also have truck routes mapped onto this map, which you can just kind of see a little bit. These are the routes that truck drivers are supposed to follow within Hunts Point, because there is a food distribution center, which is right here away in the corner. So, yeah. So this next map that we made is LiDAR data from 2017 that just shows tree canopy and grass shrubbery. Mainly, I just wanted to show this to everyone to point out that the tree canopy and grass shrubbery kind of disappear once you approach the industrial areas of Hunts Point. So once you kind of approach the water, you can kind of see that tree canopy and grass shrubbery disappear. But in the residential areas, we can see that there's an abundance of tree canopy and grass shrubbery. And then I just have these maps on the side to just kind of show, land use. And then over here, we were thinking that the low amount of tree canopy and grass shrubbery probably contributes to Hunts Point having such a high heat vulnerability. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about the last mile facilities in Hunts Point. So once again, these are over 50,000 square feet. This isn't actually my map. This is a map from the Department of City Planning, but I think it does a really good job at showing where these last mile facilities are located in Hunts Point. So they are located in that circle right there, and there are 2 of them. And there's a total of 50 last mile warehouses that are over 50,000 square feet. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some of the Amazon-owned facilities in Hunts Point. So there are 3 in Hunts Point. There's an Amazon Fresh Pickup Center where you can pick up, groceries, and they also deliver those groceries. There's a fulfillment center where they house most of their goods to be shipped out, and it also operates as a delivery center. And then we also have a delivery station, which is the last mile warehouse. So I know I'm showing 3 different locations here, but the 2 last mile facilities are the ones at 511 Berry Street, which is the fulfillment center, and 1301 Riowa Ave. So the blue circles towards the bottom, those 2 are the last mile facilities And then here's just some pictures of what they kind of look like. Okay, so we also mapped truck collisions for the year of 2024. I have the last mile warehouses in these blue circles just to give you an idea of where they are in Hunts Point. And then, we have truck routes, and then these truck accidents are represented by these circles with a little car crash symbol. And for the year of 2024, there was a total of 190 truck accidents, which we think are, which also come from the last mile warehouses. It's kind of difficult to say exactly how many of them are exactly from Amazon, but nonetheless, we wanted to include just anything that was listed as truck on this data set. And one more thing, I think it's just important to point out that these truck accidents do follow the truck routes for the most part, but there are outliers. As you can see, we have some truck accidents over here that are not following these truck routes. And then, we have a bunch which are, on the truck routes, which makes sense. But I think it's just interesting to see where these truck accidents are happening and maybe where some of these truck drivers are driving. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit about air pollution in Hunts Point. So this is showing predicted annual particulate matter averages in Hunts Point. So we used raster data to pretty much show higher concentrations of particulate matter and different air pollutants in Hunts Point. Once again, I guess the main takeaway for this map is we have the last mile warehouses in blue, and then we can kind of see that as you approach the industrial zones of Hunts Point, there's a higher concentration of particulate matter. So the green squares in this case represent a lower concentration of particulate matter, which is about 6.96 micrograms per cubic meter. And then the highest concentration that this model averages or predicts that Hunts Point had for the year of 2023 is about 7.79 micrograms per cubic meter. And to put some of these numbers, to make it make sense, New York City uses a standard of less than 9 micrograms per cubic meter. So this model is predicting that Hunts Point does have averages of particulate matter, below what the city standard is, but I think it's important to keep in mind that these averages don't necessarily account for peaks. Sometimes averages do a really good job at smushing the number down. So I think it's good to take these numbers with a grain of salt. And then the next air pollutant that we took a look at is NO2 or nitrogen dioxide. This one is in parts per billion. But mainly this map also kind of follows the same trend with particulate matter where they look almost identical. We can once again see that there's higher concentrations of nitrogen dioxide, particularly towards the industrial areas and the last mile warehouses. And by the highway, the Bruckner Expressway. And New York City uses a federal standard of less than 53 parts per billion. So we can also see that NO2 is predicted to be below federal standards here. Another air pollutant that we mapped was black carbon, or BC black carbon. So these are black carbon averages in Hunts Point. You can think of black carbon as diesel exhaust. So mainly this is from the idling of trucks in these vans. And the light purples are lower concentrations of black carbon, while the darker oranges are higher concentrations of black carbon. And I think what's particularly interesting is the food distribution center is pretty purple. So that means there's not a lot of idling around that center, which I find kind of hard to believe. But once again, towards the highway, there's a lot of traffic in Hunts Point, which kind of makes sense why the city is predicting it to have higher concentrations of black carbon. And the last mile warehouse is once again in blue, and you can kind of see that as you approach these last mile warehouses, the air quality worsens. And then this is the last air pollutant that we took a look at. We took a look at O3 or ground level ozone. Although this isn't emitted directly from trucks and is rather a chemical reaction from other air pollutants and sunlight. I just wanted to show this map to remind everyone that air pollution moves. It doesn't stay in one place. So normally we think maybe O3 would concentrate around the highways, but really what this model is showing is that it's really concentrating towards the edge or the water of Hunts Point, particularly around the food distribution center, which I think is interesting. Okay, so what does this all mean? Let's put it all together. So we're seeing last mile warehouses cluster in vulnerable environmental justice areas. We're also seeing a lot of truck activity. So we're seeing a lot of crashes. We're seeing heavy congestion along these key corridors. And when I say key corridors, we're talking about just like the ramps and like the way people exit and get on into the highway. We modeled air pollutants, NO2 and PM 2.5. These peak, especially near those corridors and those highways that I was showing on these maps. Like I was showing with ground level ozone, pollution doesn't always stay at the source, it moves and concentrates. And residents face multiple overlapping stressors and not just one. So now I just want to talk about some limitations with the maps that we created. The modeled or annual average data, it's not continuous ground measurements. So it's not real time. It's, a prediction. It's a model. O3 behaves differently than traffic tracers like nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. So these maps that I showed you, interpretation really depends on what pollutant type that you're taking a look at. These maps also don't account for wind and short-term events, especially like daily peaks, when I was talking about how these averages definitely smush peaks, and they're not fully captured by annual rasters. The crash records and facility data sets may have reporting gaps or location uncertainty. When I was going through these records, they have some crashes that are just not even on the roads. So there's definitely the quality of NYC open data can be questioned a little bit there. And then these maps, they really just show correlation and not overlap, so not direct causation. And I guess another way of saying that is we're not really showing cause and effect. We're kind of just providing maps that have already, I guess, proven the same thing or saying the same things. Okay, so here are some recommendations for Hunts Point, where we were thinking about an indirect source rule pilot program, where we launch a pilot ISR for warehouses in New York City to require large facilities to account for and mitigate emissions from associated truck traffic and incentivize zero emission deliveries or mitigation measures. We were thinking about zoning reform to limit industrial encroachment. We were thinking about updating zoning and land use regulations to restrict the clustering of freight facilities near residential areas and create buffer zones to protect vulnerable communities. We want to expand clean freight incentives with equity goals. So we want to incentivize the electrification of delivery and freight fleets and support electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We were also thinking about institutionalizing community benefit agreements or CBAs. So we want to require new warehouses or logistics projects to negotiate legally binding CBAs to provide tangible benefits like air quality monitoring, local employment, environmental impact mitigation to affected communities. And lastly, we were thinking about strengthening community engagement and environmental monitoring. We want to ensure affected residents have meaningful participation in planning and oversight, ensuring transparent monitoring of air quality, truck traffic, and emissions, ensure accountability. So moving forward, this is mainly for the Community Development Corporation that we worked with, and also for the next Capstone team that will take on our project. We were thinking that for the point CDC, we were thinking that they continue traffic data collection or truck counts. So as of now, Hunts Point's residents are counting trucks on their phones using an app called Counterpoint. And this is a really strong tool for citizen science. We were also thinking that maybe they explore real-time air pollution collection methods. I just put in parentheses AeroQual, which is like one company that I know that provides real-time air pollution collection methods. They have an awesome map and it, gives you a bunch of data. We were also thinking that they promote the expansion of green buffers and tree planting near industrial corridors. So we were thinking about green buffer zones and more trees and greenery around maybe these ramps and just these areas where trucks come in and flow. And then for the next team, we were thinking that they expand on our GIS analysis, particularly with truck flows, maybe some multi-year trends. We talked about a little bit how Hunts Point is an asthma alley, I think, and how they have some of the highest hospitalization rates for asthma. So for the next team, I think it'd be awesome for them to dive into the health data and show, show asthma rates through their maps. And then lastly, we didn't get a chance to do this, but we think using interviews to complement GIS and sensor data would be a great thing for the next team, because really this is all about community storytelling and humanizing the data. So yeah. Thank you for your time, everyone. I'm going to open the floor to questions now.
Hi everyone, my name is Belkız and I will be presenting today with my teammates Anthony, Nursel, and Servet. We are Team Rooftop Resilience, and our project is Green Roof as a nature-based solutions for enhancing urban sustainability in NYC. So let me start with short recap. And last semester, we focused on the green roof basics, economic issues, and NYC local laws. And this semester, we move from analysis to solutions and simple tools and tiered pathway to make a green roof easier to use on real buildings. We will walk you through that framework in the next slides. Green roofs are a nature-based roof design, a living layer of plants and growing medium on top of a regular roof. On this slide, we compare natural ground layers with green roof layers, and you can see they follow the same logic: vegetation and soil, drainage, and then protection and waterproofing on the structure. As you can see, there are three types of the green roofs: extensive, semi-intensive, and intensive. Extensive roofs are the lighest with thin soil and low plants and little maintenance. Semi-intensive roofs have medium soil depth, weight, and care. And the intensive roofs are the deepest and heaviest one, like roof gardens, with larger plants on the highest maintenance. And the fun fact on the right side, even a small 10 by 10 foot green roof can capture about as much carbon dioxide as a 10-foot tree. And this slide shows how green roofs can appear at many different scales, from small sheds to airports, but they share the same missions. And now Nursel will talk about some of the main pros and cons of green roofs.
Hi everyone, I'll be giving a brief overview of the key benefits and challenges of green roofs. Green roofs offer major environmental and economic benefits, especially in dense cities like New York City. They reduce heating and cooling. Loads, extend roof lifespan, and significantly cut stormwater runoff, easing pressure on the sewer system. Challenges remain high upfront cost, structural limitation, especially on older buildings in Manhattan, ongoing maintenance, and New York City's complex permitting requirements. But New York success stories show what's possible. The Javits Center retains about 77% rainfall per storm, saving an estimated $2.5 million in detention cost. Randolph Island Green Roof retains 50 to 90% of stormwater and lowers heating and cooling loads by roughly 30%. These cases demonstrate that despite hurdles, green roofs offer strong long-term environmental and financial value. So in this project, we begin by asking a set of guiding research questions to understand both the current landscape of green roofs in New York City and the challenging limiting their broader adoption. First, we ask, what is the current state of green roof adoption in New York City? This helped us evaluate where green roofs are actually being built, which types of buildings host them, and whether they align with city's climate resilience needs. Our second question focused on understanding obstacles. What technical, legislative, and economic barriers prevent wider implementation? Here we examined issues like structural load requirements, permitting processes, policy limitations, and the cost burden on building owners, factors that significantly shape who can and cannot build green roofs. Finally, we ask what strategies can increase accessibility and the effectiveness, especially in underserved communities. This allowed us to explore equity-centered approaches, such as targeted incentives, policy reforms, and community-led models to ensure green roofs serve the neighborhoods most vulnerable to extreme heat and environmental injustice. Together, these questions frame our analysis and guide our recommendation for making green roofs a more equitable and impactful climate solution for New York City. So what's the current state of green roof adoption in New York City? New York City has roughly 800 green roofs, less than 0.1% of its 1 million buildings, far below what's needed for meaningful climate impact. Most of these roofs are concentrated in Manhattan and in high-income neighborhoods, raising equity concerns about who benefits. They are primarily found on condominiums, multi-family residential, and commercial building, often treated more as luxury amenities than essential climate infrastructure. Extreme heat is New York City's deadliest climate hazard, and it disproportionately affects Black, Hispanic, and low-income neighborhoods. Areas like Northern Manhattan, South Bronx, and Central Brooklyn face higher temperatures, fewer trees, and limited access to cooling. Harlem illustrates this clearly. Dense building, low vegetation, and energy insecurity create dangerous indoor heat, contributing to higher heat-related illness and mortality. Green roofs can directly lower roof and indoor temperatures to reduce energy burdens. Yet most installations today are in the wealthiest areas rather than in high vulnerability neighborhoods like Harlem. Directing investment towards these communities would advance climate injustice and strengthen local resilience. So I'm going to hand over to Anthony for New York City green roof legislative history.
Okay. So this is a look at a legislative history of green roofs in New York City. And you can see before 2008, there wasn't really any legislation around this issue. Then in 2008, the city introduced its first incentive, which was a $4.50 per square foot tax abatement for green roofs. But the uptake was very, very limited, which we'll get into shortly. There's been a few other moments since then, but the most significant came in 2019, where as part of the Climate Mobilization Act, the city passed local laws 92 and 94, which mandated that new buildings and major roof renovations must either install solar panels, a green roof, or a combination of the two. And then in 2022, the tax abatement was increased to up to $15 per square foot in designated priority areas. So speaking about the tax abatement, how well has it worked? The short answer is that it really hasn't. The program launched in 2008 and then increased slightly in 2013. It's jumped significantly in 2022. But despite that, fewer than 10 properties in the entire city have ever actually used the program. So out of millions of buildings, that's basically zero. Like no one's using this thing, which is a sign that the economic incentives and the promotions is just not matching with real world conditions. Then look at local laws 92 and 94. They attempted to mandate action instead of just simply encouraging it. And these laws apply to new buildings, full roof replacements, and major roof renovations. And they require, in theory, solar, green roofs, or a combination of both. But it hasn't been the case, which we'll get into shortly. And now, so what?
Okay. So to understand what limits broader implementation, we ran a survey on barriers, interest, and awareness among New Yorkers. We received 100 responses, almost evenly split between renters and owners, and most have lived in New York for 10 plus years. We asked about roof accessibility, interest in using roof space, and perceived barriers. As expected, maintenance, building approvals, and access were top concerns. What we didn't expect was that 55% were interested in green roofs purely for their environmental benefits, even if they couldn't access it. 96% said that they would like a roof planted in some capacity, and 69% would help maintain it. And 60% of the respondents did not even know about the green roof tax abatement that Anthony was just explaining. Respondents were also asked what guidance would be helpful. Most selected navigating city agencies and clear explanations of feasibility. And in general, participants wanted greenery on their roof in some form and were open to alternative models that could make it more feasible.
So just looking at some of the technical issues that so when we're looking at like why isn't adoption higher, we can look at the technical barriers first. So a huge portion of New York City's building stock is pre-war, and many rooftops were simply not designed to carry the additional weight that green roof systems require, especially when they're saturated with water, and reinforcing those structures can be extremely expensive. There's also the waterproofing risk. So retrofitting a green roof on an old or deteriorating membrane increases the likelihood of leaks or root penetration, which raises long-term liability and maintenance costs. And then there's also just the basic issue of access. Like many New York City buildings literally don't have legal or safe roof access, which makes installation and also ongoing maintenance significantly more complicated. On the legislative side, why the tax abatement isn't working, it's failed for several reasons. So like we said in that survey before, a lot of owners didn't even know that it existed. And at one point, Department of Buildings didn't even seem to know it existed and accidentally removed a lot of the information from its website. The application process is also very bureaucratic, confusing, and slow. And the criteria are very strict, like things like if your soil depth or your plant mix is off, you can be disqualified from the credit. And then even when the money is available, developers and building owners tend to prefer other incentives like zoning bonuses, league credits, or solar rebates, which are more lucrative and more standardized and easier to secure. It's also typical of the way that incentive programs in the US tend to work. Instead of giving the money upfront as grants, they tend to require you to spend the money first and then claim the money back, which is kind of a risky way to do it, particularly when you're talking about a $100,000 investment. And so as a result, fewer than 1% of the city's existing green roofs will actually use the abatement. So when we look at local laws 92 and 94, why is this law not working as intended? Well, most of the owners are choosing solar if they're complying with the law. They're going down the road of just putting a solar roof in because it's cheaper, easier, better funded, and carries less compliance risks. Local laws 92 and 94, they're also just broadly a one-size-fits-all sort of policy from both an engineering and an economic perspective in a city where one size doesn't really fit anybody. There's also been a huge problem that REBNY, which is the Real Estate Board of New York, has lobbied to weaken the law and make it so that it's actually not applicable in a lot of cases, which we'll talk over in a minute. So this is an example of a building on Roosevelt Island called Riverwalk Heights, which is actually a building that my company works on. It opened in 2024. Construction was done in 2022. It's an entirely new building. It's not a renovation or anything like that. It clearly falls under the local laws 92, 94 scope of what was intended for the law. And yet when you look at these overhead shots, there's no green roof, there's no solar or anything like that. And so what exactly happened? And you can kind of see here how REBNY kind of like gutted these laws. So what they did is they pushed to have what was called the sustainable roofing zone, which basically means that the green roof area only has to apply to that area and basically excludes areas that have things like mechanical areas, so they don't have to have green roofs. Fire department access, which was not actually something that FDNY actually requested, but they managed to put that into laws anyway, saying that FDNY needs to have like clear lines of access on the roof. Areas that were deemed inaccessible also don't have to have green roofs. Areas that were deemed recreational areas don't have to have green roofs. And then probably the best part is that any building that has any sort of 80-20 workforce housing got a 5-year extension on compliance. So basically they managed to carve up every section of the roof so that it doesn't have to comply with the law. Finally, as well, the economic issue. So New York has a huge concentration of condos and co-ops, each with independent boards, which means multiple layers of approvals, engineering reports, and shareholder votes before any roof projects can actually move forward. And many buildings simply just can't afford the 6-figure cost of installation, especially when structural reinforcement is required. Boards worry about aesthetics, maintenance, liability, which leads to delays or outright denials. And so the result is slow, inconsistent adoption, and often no adoption at all.
So to explore strategies for increasing green roof accessibility, we drew from case studies, expert interviews, and our survey. Structural capacity is the biggest hurdle, and adoption would be easier if support were available to assess structural feasibility using existing resources. This raises some key questions. How can policies be aligned? How can bureaucracy be reduced? And how can processes be clearly communicated to all stakeholders? To answer, we propose a 3-pronged implementation model: policy realignment, framework for on-site install, and a centralized resource hub. So for policy realignment, we developed 6 recommendations. So these are: provide city-funded structural assessment as a first step, offer equitable incentives that provide upfront financial support rather than post-construction payments, democratize rooftop access by supporting tenant or co-op managed installs with training and resources, leverage existing programs rather than creating new bureaucracies, adopt green roof as standard construction details for energy and stormwater compliance during filing, and ensure policies reflect the diversity of building stock and economic realities in New York. Our second recommendation is to reframe how we understand on-site installs from the end user's perspective. Instead of thinking in terms of green roof types, we developed a tiered framework based on 4 barriers: structural complexity, regulatory complexity, time, and cost. This framework translates known barriers into actionable strategies, something we didn't find in our research. So Nursel will expand on that right now.
Our tiered case studies show that green roofs in New York City vary widely, not only in design and community impact, but also in cost and economic feasibility. Tier 1, represented by Brooklyn Garage, shows that possible at the high end. Intensive rooftop farms provide major ecosystem benefits, but cost $40 to $90 per square foot due to deep soil irrigation and structural reinforcement. Research shows these systems are only viable with grants, partnership, and multiple revenue streams. Tier 2, like City College of New York Solar Roof Pod, reflects semi-intensive institutional system costing $20 to $40 per square foot. They are lighter and smaller than full farms, but still require custom components and ongoing maintenance, often relying on intermittent institutional funding. Tier 3 is illustrated by the Cook Fox Green Park modular roof, shows how lightweight, extensive systems can reduce barriers. These cost $10 to $25 per square foot, avoid major structural upgrades, and install easily. Though smaller systems still face higher per square foot cost and steady maintenance needs. Tier 4 includes container gardens and informal systems like River Park Farm. These are the most accessible at $10 to $30 per square foot using simple planters and crates. They are flexible and affordable, but rely heavily on volunteer labor, have shorter lifespans, and rarely qualify for incentives, raising questions about their long-term durability.
So, as Nursel showed on the map, we choose a street in West Harlem. We added a hospital there to illustrate how Tier 1 could work on a larger institutional buildings. So then we divided these different buildings into tiers to see what type of green roof could be realistic for each one. And Tier 1 is a full intensive roof garden on the hospital, so it carries the heaviest loads. On an existing roof, we may need to strengthen the structure and carefully detail waterproofing and drainage so the roof stays safe. Tier 2 is a rooftop community garden with raised bed, a small greenhouse and tanks. So the loads are medium heavy and concentrated. We check those points, protect the waterproofing, and keep clear routes for irrigation, drainage, and daily access. And for Tier 3 is a modular tray green roof with light shallow loads on a continuous protection and drainage layer. And it's easy to install and move. So it's a practical low-risk option for typical residential roofs. And Tier 4 is our lowest barrier option, simple pots and planters, so the overall loads is very light, and most of the roof still acts like a standard roof. It's a realistic first step for weaker roofs. And now Servet will show how this framework works at the blocks.
Okay, so at the block scale, we can start visualizing all the roofs collectively. So we've zoomed in on the Harlem block that we were referring to. It's a block with 2 to 6 story buildings. It's a mix of different uses, and it totals to about 51,800 square feet of roof surface. Okay, so at baseline, this is, for all intents and purposes, 100% impervious. There's essentially no stormwater retention, and cooling is localized to the roofs which have these white cool roofs. With a 50% uniform coverage, we can retain about 15% of a 3.25-inch design storm, remove nearly 480 kilograms of particulate matter annually, and improve cooling through the additional benefits received from the evapotranspiration, and the soil's thermal mass. So the method that we used over here, it's just a simple method type calculation to calculate the retention of the water. And for the particulate matter, we used a formula from a 2008 study that we referenced in our paper. So in a more equitable scenario where coverage is more proportional to how many units there are in a building, retention can be increased to about 23% without requiring all buildings to do the same kind of work. And lastly, we recommend creating a centralized resource hub to demystify bureaucracy and provide owners a clear, accessible place for guidance. As an evolving resource, the hub can also house infographics like this to show existing and proposed logistical paths to installing a green roof. So the next few slides will have this little QR at the bottom, so you can see the full draft on your phone if you choose to. So in addition to public-facing resources like this, walking homeowners through the typical path for a full construction, we can also identify opportunities for the city to leverage its existing resources. So we'll zoom in on this on the next slide. So here's an example of a novel logistical pathway leveraging the city's existing framework. So under DOB inspections, which is something that exists, owners could directly request a structural audit. So the structural audit is something that doesn't exist under DOB inspections. If reinforcement isn't required, they can move on to proposed installation pathways 1 or 2. Pathway 1 uses a limited alteration application, which currently is used for small work like minor plumbing. So it can be done without a full DOB filing. And in Pathway 2, we're proposing that the owners or community members can self-install, but with city support and training, similar to how our parks rely on volunteer networks and trained super stewards. So to summarize, our capstone introduces frameworks, policies, and logistical pathways that can be implemented to make our green roofs and even rooftop gardens a more effective component in the city's overall resiliency agenda. What we didn't have the time to fully explore, and would be great if a future team could take on, is quantifying and putting a specific dollar amount to the benefits. A pilot study to test the alternative installation pathway to see if it actually works in a community, and then developing the resource hub along with municipal partners and professional partners. So we'll end with that. And any questions or feedback that you have would be great. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Dylan, this is Carlos, and our project focuses on optimal structural design for low carbon structures. Okay. So every building we put up depends on huge amounts of raw materials, sand, gravel, stone, metals that are pulled from earth through large scale extraction. That process alone puts a lot of pressure on natural ecosystems. Then to turn those materials into concrete, steel, glass, and other products, we burn energy and release large amounts of CO2. On top of that, we add more emissions through transporting these materials to site and through the construction work itself. So construction isn't just about what we see above ground. It's also about this hidden flow of resources and carbon behind every project. And because of that, reducing material use and embodied carbon isn't optional anymore. It's a key sustainability priority. So in this presentation, we'll focus on strategies that directly target those two levers, using less material and choosing lower carbon ways to build. So buildings, they're responsible for roughly 40% of global CO2 emissions. That comes not only from how we operate them, but from the energy, resource extraction, pollution, and waste tied to making them. Construction and demolition alone generate about 30 to 40% of global waste, and our traditional go-to materials, concrete and steel, carry extremely high embodied carbon. So all of this is powered by, heavy use of water, land, and fossil fuels. The takeaway is that switching to efficient appliances isn't enough. To actually meet these climate goals, we have to rethink how we design, build, and eventually reuse our buildings. That means things like new fabrication methods, more sustainable materials, and tools like topology optimization that help us do more with less. So the goal is to have smarter, lighter, longer lasting buildings that can dramatically reduce their environmental footprints. So for our project, the goal is to explore a hybrid approach where form and material are designed together as one system. We're focusing specifically on the structural backbones of buildings, so beams, columns, and slabs, because that's where a lot of material and embodied carbon sit. So instead of first drawing a shape and then asking engineers to make it work, we're looking at ways to optimize structure and material simultaneously. So that means integrating form finding with material performance to search for the best combination, not just what's standard or easiest. So through this, we're investigating design strategies that merge geometry and material behavior rather than treating them as separate steps. The ambition was to arrive at a structural solution that are not only more efficient, but also more expressive and more sustainable. We're just going to do a brief overview of our first semester work, which looked at different form finding methodologies for topology optimization, as well as different forms of more sustainable concrete or cement.
Hello. Topology optimization methods vary in complexity and control. For instance, density-based methods are simple and efficient, but mesh-dependent. Lower set and phase field methods offer better geometry at higher computational costs. Evolutionary methods give clear layout, but scale poorly. Graph approaches are practical, but problem-specific. And homogenization deliver high performance with significant computational and implementation complexity. Concrete types differ in how they balance performance, cost, and environmental impact. Traditional Portland concrete is affordable and widely used, but produces high CO2 emission and has limited tensile capacity without a reinforcement. Modified concrete, such as bioconcrete, graphene concrete, and carbon-cured concrete, improve durability and reduce emission to varying degrees, thus they remain Portland-based and require higher cost or a specialized process. Low carbon alternative like geopolymer, ferro, metakaolin concrete, and ashcrete offer major emission reduction and high durability, but involve greater material handling or standardized complexity. Bio-based and air-based options, including bamboo reinforcing concrete, hempcrete, plastic waste concrete, limecrete, and laminate air, are highly sustainable and low carbon, yet their lower strength or durability limits their use in high-load structural applications.
The big one. So getting into what we were working on this semester, optimization. We're going to talk about a method of optimization. So one of the softwares we use was Fusion. It's Autodesk's integrated design and analysis software. It combines 3D modeling, structural simulation, and basic optimization tools in one platform. That means we can sketch the geometry, assign materials, and immediately see how it behaves under load without jumping in between different programs. The workflow, it starts with getting the dimensions of the element, then defining the material, apply different loads and constraints, and setting a safety factor. Then software then gives us a displacement and stress results, which we use to optimize the design by adjusting geometry or material until we get a efficient solution. We're applying this process to the core building elements, so beams, columns, and slabs, the structural backbones that most buildings rely on. And by modeling and testing these in Fusion, we can explore how much material we can remove while still keeping the structure safe, efficient, and aligned with our sustainability goals. So here we're showing how we started to integrate structure and design in one simple system, one slab, 4 beams, 4 columns. The strategy, optimize first, then make it greener. So instead of immediately swapping in a sustainable material, we first use Fusion to reduce the amount of material needed while still meeting the structural criteria. And then once we get an efficient form, we begin to look at using more sustainable material to further cut that environmental impact. Here are the results for this test case. So the starting weight of this whole system was approximately 56,000 pounds. After optimization with a mass ratio, which is the portion of material that we intend to keep, which was about 37%, that brings the entire weight down of this slab or of this system to about 20,000 pounds. So even with this relatively simple assembly of one slab and a few beams and columns, we're already seeing a huge reduction in material, which would also in turn translates to lower embodied carbon. Now we're going to introduce NTOP, which was our main workflow, main tool for our workflow. So it's another computational design and analysis platform that's built around field-driven design. So that means instead of manually editing geometry, we put in parameters like stress, distance, or load paths to directly control the shape. It's designed for things like lattices, lightweighting, and topology optimization, and it lets you build fast, reusable workflows for very complex geometry. So in this project, we use NTOP for a series of studies, a mesh edge length study, which is used to balance accuracy and computation time, a volume fraction constraint to set the limit on how much material can be used, slab edge length study, which is the total length of the slab, and a force study to see how the system responds under different loading conditions. So first one, mesh edge length study. When we run this analysis in NTOP, it breaks the model into lots of tiny pieces or elements. That's the mesh. And the edge length is basically the size of those pieces. So if we choose smaller edge length, we get smaller elements, which means more detail, more accurate results, but the computation becomes slower and heavier. If we choose a larger edge length, we get bigger elements and the model runs faster, but we lose that precision and finer details. So the mesh edge length study was really about finding kind of the sweet spot, a mesh that's fine enough to capture the structural behavior that we care about, but also coarse enough that we can iterate quickly and test multiple design options. So we did edge length at 0.10, 0.15, and 0.20. And we decided to go with a 0.10 edge length. We just wanted to have the highest level of detail and accuracy possible that doesn't crash the system. So in topology optimization, you also have a volume fraction that sets the maximum percentage of material we're allowed to keep inside the design space. A lower percentage means we tell the software to remove more material, giving us a lighter design, but potentially closer to the limits of stiffness and strength, while a higher percentage means we keep more material, so the design is heavier, but also stiffer and stronger. So by adjusting this volume fraction, we can test different scenarios and look for the best between weight and performance, light enough to reduce material and carbon, but still safe and structurally reliable. So here another bunch of studies we did for volume fraction constraint, ranging from 25% to 50%. And we found that 35% was kind of the sweet spot in terms of, performance, material savings, as well as kind of aesthetically also, and what would work the best under specific loads. Here we test different slab sizes by changing the span or the edge length of the slab geometry. The goal is to see how those size changes affect stiffness, deflection, and how much material we need. So we keep the loads and supports the same and only adjust the edge length values. So by comparing the results, we can see which slabs deflect too much, which are over-designed, and which ones kind of hit that sweet spot. And in the end, this study should help us pick an edge length that meets our performance targets with the least amount of material, which supports both structurally efficiency and sustainability. And yes, we went with, with this specific one, 15 by 15 length with an 18-inch slab, which is what the model is. Because it seemed to give us, out of all these options, the most optimal design and efficiency. And then lastly, a force study. So here we take the same design and test it under different load values. The purpose is to see how the part responds as the forces increase or decrease. Does it deform too much? Does it hit high stress, or does it stay within acceptable limits? So we keep the geometry and supports fixed and only vary the applied force. So by comparing those runs, we can build kind of a picture of how robust the design is under a range of realistic loading cases. The outcome of the force study is to confirm that the design will stay within stress and displacement limits across all those different scenarios, so that we're not just making sure we're optimized for one load case, but for kind of a more realistic spectrum of forces. The software uses linear pounds per foot, so we did 1, 10, 25, 50, and it didn't seem to show much difference, if any difference, in any of these different forces applied. We're going to talk a little bit about the mold. No, sorry. So before jumping into the full-size piece, we started with a small 10 by 10 prototype to test the printability. So this lets us validate that geometry, the support strategy, the tolerances, and that overall surface quality. So as we print, we tune the settings, things like orientation, layer height, infill, and print speed to see what would give us the cleanest and strongest result. The goal was to identify any issues earlier in the process, like warping or weak zones, while the piece is still small and manageable. But once we were able to get that prototype to behave well, then scaling up to a larger mold that we can begin to pour cement into. And then this is just quickly how we created the mold. So it was, using Rhino, exporting that mold from NTOP, then taking that mesh and creating a 1 millimeter shell that would create that hollow mold that we can pour into, and then splitting that model into 5 parts so it's small enough to 3D print and then easy to assemble. This is an example of how we fabricated that mold using 3D print software, importing STL files, slicing it to fit in our printer bed, then moving to supports and print. We add that necessary supports in the file, check the preview, and then start the print. And once all these are printed. We can assemble the mold by gluing and aligning the parts together. That would give us that full mold. Yes, now we're going to talk a little bit more about some more material exploration.
Three D printing's construction relies on developing alternative binder to replace Portland cement in order to improve sustainability, reduce resource use, and lower carbon emission. But a key challenge is that 3D printable concrete often has a higher carbon footprint than conventional concrete because it requires more cement paste and fewer coarse aggregate to remain flowable. To address this, a wide range of alternative material, such as earthen mixes, geopolymers, specialized cement, carbonation-based system, and industrial byproduct binder. They are being explored to achieve printable concrete with lower environmental impact. Several sustainable binders can replace Portland cement, each with trade-off. Earthen and earthen and gypsum systems are very low carbon, but weak and limited to non-sustainable use. Geopolymers, MgO-based cement, and LZ significantly reduce CO2 emission and offer good performance. So they face challenges related to cost, curing, durability, or workability. Calcium aluminate cement is mainly valued to rapid setting, but is expensive and less suitable for long-term structural applications. Early stage CO2 sequestration and accelerated carbonation curing increase strength and permanently store carbon, but they require a specialized curing condition and raise concern about long-term durability and reinforcement corrosion. The diatomaceous air and waste glass serve as a partial cement replacement that lowers CO2 emission and enhance long-term strength through addition of CSH formation, although they can increase water demand, reduce early strength, or affect workability if it is not carefully controlled. The diatomaceous air stands out of the most practical alternative binder when compared with other low-carbon options. It provides significantly higher long-term strength through dense CSH formation, achieves substantial reduction in CO2 emission and energy use, and remains very low cost and widely available with minimal processing. It mixes and replaces like conventional concrete without special equipment. It's fully compatible with steel reinforcement and is mainly dragged like the higher water demand, need for super plasticizer, and a slower setting at high replacement level are manageable in practice. In contrast, many other binder options require costly activator, a special curing system, or face durability and corrosion issues, making them less suitable for full-scale construction. Overall, the diatomaceous air offers the best balance of performance, sustainability, cost, and real-world applicability. The diatomaceous air, one of the components, is lightweight, highly porous, silica-rich material derived from fossilized microscopic algae. Limestone, by contrast, is a calcium carbonate-based sedimentary rock formed from marine shell and skeletal fragments. Extensively used in cement construction, soil treatment, and industry. Together, this material highlight the contrast between a highly reactive porous siliceous material and dense carbonate mineral that plays a foundational role in conventional cement and construction systems. The diatomaceous air and limestone power can partially replace Portland cement to produce greener and stronger concrete without altering standard mixing or curing process. Diatomaceous earth contributes reactive silica that form additional CSH, leading to denser microstructure and higher long-term strength, although it increase water demand and benefits for superplasticizer to maintain workability. Limestone power supply carbonate ion that stabilize aluminate phase and accelerate early hydration, improving early age strength. When combined, this material enhances workability, durability, and comprehensive strength over time, achieving both performance gains and reduced environmental impact. Partial replacement of Portland cement with diatomaceous earth and limestone power significantly improve both mechanical performance and environmental impact. For instance, mortar containing 20 to 30% diatomaceous earth achieve about 138 to 145% of strength of plain cement at 28 to 90 days. An even higher replacement level combined with limestone power surpass control strength at later age. A small addition of gypsum help fine-tune hydration, while the optimal mix of roughly 30% diatomaceous earth and 5% limestone power reach very high compressive strength in both mortar and concrete at 28 days. For an environmental perspective, replacing 30 to 40 of cement with this material reduce global warming potential by 30 to 45%, lower energy consumption by 27 to 35%, and cuts major air pollutant emission by 20 to 40%, demonstrating as a strong balance between performance gains and sustainability. In this system, Portland cement hydration first produces CSH and calcium hydroxide. The amorphous silica in the diatomaceous earth then reacts puzzolanically with calcium hydroxide to form additional CSH, which increase long-term strength and reduce porosity. Limestone power accelerates early hydration by providing nucleation sites and react with aluminate phase to form stable carboaluminate compounds, improving early stage stability. With a composition of roughly 65% of white Portland cement, 30% of diatomaceous earth, and 5% limestone power, corresponding to a 35 cement replacement, the result is a dense high-strength concrete reaching about 50 megapascal at 28 days, with lower carbon footprint, reduce energy intensity, and have a good workability when combined with a superplasticizer. The system uses white Portland cement, partially replaced by diatomaceous earth and limestone power, with gypsum and superplasticizer to control hydration and workability. Diatomaceous earth provides puzzolanic strength gain, while limestone enhances early hydration. Among the test mixes, an optimal composition of about 65% the cement, 30% diatomaceous earth, and 5% limestone achieve the best balance of strength, workability, and sustainability. The concrete mix design evaluates diatomaceous earth and limestone power as partial replacement for Portland cement, focuses on compressive strength and life cycle assessment. The water to cementitious material ratio is fixed to a 0.48 with a total aggregate to binder ratio of 3.9.1, while the diatomaceous air replacement range from 10 to 30%, and limestone power keep constant at 5%. The mixed proportion show a progressive reduction in Portland cement content as the diatomaceous air and limestone increase, enabling lower cement use while maintaining workable and structurally viable concrete mixture.
So lastly, we're just going to show the merging of the optimization process with sustainable concrete cement material. This was the final casting process from start to finish. First we build the box. This is our form work that holds both the sand base and the cement while it cures. So it has to be sturdy and well sealed. Step 2 is we add the sand. So pour sand to the box to create that stable base. Then we mix the cement. In this case, we used a natural cement mixture, which is half the weight of normal Portland cement and 60% less embodied carbon. Then we pour the cement into the box, and then at the end, remove the mold after the cement is cured. So this is kind of that process from left to right, building the box, pouring the sand, mixing the cement, then pouring the cement, and then our mold, our concrete mold. Thank you.
All right, I'll start, I guess.
Yeah, go for it.
So we're going to talk about the role of batteries in the Harlem retrofit project. And when we started batteries, I guess I thought, batteries, what could we find as far as that goes? And it turned out there was quite a bit. Oh, there we go. So that's us. We could skip that. And then this is our piece of the puzzle in the Harlem retrofit, in the Harlem community project. So there's a number of activities that are going on in there. There's the building upgrades, the envelope upgrades, which were handled by some of the other projects. There's community outreach, which we touch upon. Mainly, we're interested in the energy storage systems. And here's a list of the other projects that we were involved with, that are involved with the Harlem retrofit, starting with the deep retrofits. There was some other analysis, and then our focus, which is on storage technology. Just to state, we probably can't state it enough. Storage technology is a key component of renewables and solar, without which they really are not fully functional, at least in my opinion. So some of the goals that we try to meet. Oh, is that a question?
No, just someone joining.
Oh, that's someone joining. Okay. So we want to help the city using the storage technology, meet the city's decarbonization targets, and avoid the LL97 fines. We want to support the rollout, obviously, of the solar and the renewables, which the batteries are paired with. They can also do some work on competing energy, reducing energy costs in and of themselves. There's a lot to be said for how they impact grid constraints, which is a very large topic in and of itself. And then finally, work with the community to make sure there's some equitable distribution of the possible revenues from this and the benefits of you taking advantage of this technology. This is just a quick overview of some of our activities to date. We met with a whole slew of vendors. We went to a number of industry events. We toured different facilities that were out there to see where this might reside. Tyler went on some tours of existing facilities elsewhere in the city. And then we met with some of the PhD students in other areas to get some knowledge about what was going on in their departments and how this fits together. And then Tyler's going to go on with the technology findings.
So one significant component of our research was a survey of just existing energy storage technologies. We wanted to take a deep dive into what they have to offer and which ones might be potentially applicable in an urban environment. So we went into depth about all these different types of energy storage. And they come in two basic camps. You've got your electrochemical stuff, which is a more traditional battery, what you think of when you think of storage, but there's also a more novel way to store energy, which is through thermal storage. And you see this a lot in bigger buildings around the city, and there's going to be a case study for that. But the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones I'm going to focus on here. Before we dive into it, though, just a quick little recap of how we talk about batteries. So there's two kind of main metrics when you look at a battery spec sheet. You've got your capacity. I should stay here. You've got your capacity, which is if you have a jug of milk, it's the gallon. The gallon is how much it's holding. So your kilowatt hours is how much the battery can hold. And then your instantaneous output is what you would measure in kilowatts. So the power company cares about that because that's how thick of a gauge wire essentially they're going to have to run to that to support its maximum instantaneous output. Another kind of important consideration that we're looking at here is you can see this is, as an example, this is a Tesla Powerwall. There's a number of different competitors out there that are a very similar product, but this is the one that the most information exists on. It's the most kind of proliferated out through the market. They offer a 10-year warranty, which means that they certify that it's going to stay at or above 70% of its original capacity for at least 10 years. So people extrapolate that out to generally designed systems to last 15, sometimes 20 years is the kind of life expectancy. So for financially modeling purposes, we use a metric of 15 years. So looking at a case study, this is a large commercial building in Manhattan, built in 1932, 11 Madison Avenue. The leaders of this building are pretty environmentally focused already. They went for LEED Gold certification, as well as it's an Energy Star building, so they've done some work on the envelope. However, it still was struggling with aging infrastructure and energy systems, specifically heating and cooling mechanical systems that were not efficient, and they were not going to meet their local law 97 goals. So they teamed up with Trane. They engineered a novel system using storage tanks, 64 jumbo storage tanks here that store like basically a slushy form of ice. So they use like a chemical to keep it sort of aqueous so that it doesn't like burst, the way that something would in your fridge or your freezer. But yeah, so this is able to essentially charge up overnight by using energy to cool water. It stores that as ice. And then during the day, this would be a summertime example, right? So during the day, when they're blasting the air conditioners through the whole building, it's actually using up that ice that was stored the night before. So this is really cool because you don't have any degradation. It's just ice. And so that also has an advantageous kind of chemical profile. You're not like mining terrible things in faraway places. However, I'm going to zoom in for a second on their financial analysis. So this was kind of the starkest thing about this case study that jumped out at us was that Trane was super celebratory about the fact that their system came in so far under cost compared to like a lithium-ion battery storage. So they used Lazard's levelized cost of storage from 2017. That was the most recent data at the time. And just looking at the most recent Lazard levelized cost of storage, that number has plummeted all the way down to 322. So that's in a matter of 8 years. 5 years after this project was completed, the economics went from being like obvious to being, oh, that's kind of on par almost. So it's sending people a lot right back to the drawing board and just like, it's time to reconsider because the thermal storage is, it's a bespoke engineered system. You're going to have a lot of hard costs there. You need to pay someone to design it and kind of start from scratch every time. Whereas batteries are something that are experiencing economies of scale, and the cost of them is just going down from here. This hasn't leveled off at all. So that was kind of the most striking thing about that. So zooming in on lithium ion and lithium iron phosphate, the thing to mention about the chemistries is really that there's been a kind of seismic shift in the industry just over the last 5 years that's contributed to that cost drop that I'm talking about. And that's the overtaking of lithium iron phosphate, LFP. So that's a relatively new chemistry. It has a lot of key advantages over traditional lithium ion. One of the main things is that some of the famous kind of nasty things that are in lithium batteries, like cobalt, are not present in this battery. So lithium iron phosphate, as you can tell from the name, it's iron, phosphorus. These are plentiful and cheap elements. So that's a huge kind of positive movement in the industry. And at this point, battery energy storage systems that are getting installed are going to be this one. Additionally, it actually has a longer cycle life. It's basically a mechanism of it has less expansion as it cycles. So the mechanical structure of it is more sound. Looking to the future, though, our research kind of like led us to understand that sodium ion is one of the most promising upcoming technologies. This chemistry has even less in terms of volatile and problematic sourcing. It doesn't even need lithium. So now you're just looking at, so this would be, there's different forms of sodium ion, but like this would be sodium iron phosphate, which is similar to lithium iron phosphate. So you've got sodium, iron, and phosphorus. These are things that we all have here within our borders. So there's a strong potential for a domestic supply chain, which is incredible. So there are full-scale grid-connected pilots live as of this summer. So this one seems like it's right around the corner. But at the same time, we're not here telling anyone that they should wait for some future technology. There's also viable options right now. There's a few other chemistries just worth touching on, especially because these two have focused in on the urban environment. They're focused on safety and longevity. So just as an example, vanadium redox flow, it's kind of essentially you take a battery and expand it out into like tanks. So you've got liquids that are actually flowing around through tanks. So that has a high capacity for like maintainability, serviceability. And zinc manganese oxide, which shout out CCNY alum from the engineering department. This company, Urban Electric Power, has been working for several years. They had products out in 2015, so it's been a bit of a journey, and we're not totally clear on whether that's commercially available yet. It doesn't appear to be, but these things seem like promising options to keep an eye on. So I'm going to turn it over back to Barry to talk about the financial side of things.
So let's, so just to sort of echo what Tyler already said is that since 2017, the costs of these storage systems are dropping very dramatically, and they're about a quarter of what they were in 2017. There's even more recent studies that show greater drops, but that's the general idea. We're on a very steep downward trend for these particular products, and it's happening almost daily. So this is just a bit of recent news I wanted to put out there, is that there's a study that shows it's actually possible with a combination of battery technology and solar technology to power some of the sunny cities in the world 24/7. They were talking of, I believe it was a 6 gigawatt solar and a 17 gigawatt hour battery, and they would be able to power 24/7, 365 days a year, the city of Las Vegas, among other cities. So that's just a study, mind you, but that's, the technology is really here for the large scale systems. This is just to get an idea of the basic, this is kind of flipping to a very different subject when we talk about the individual economics to building owners. So we have the basic rate structures that an individual owner might see. There's a flat rate. We all know about this. These are the structures that come out of your bill. There's what's called a time of use rate, where you pay day or different rates day and night, and then there's something called a peak demand rate, where you pay an amount based on your highest point during the day. So these three, the time of use rates and the peak demand rates, give an individual an opportunity to take advantage of that, and maybe with a battery find a way to reduce their charges. Then just to continue into some of the other revenue streams that are out there, these are mostly for commercial clients. I don't think we're going to go into these all in detail, but they provide commercial clients with the opportunity to have their rates reduced or earn some money by servicing the grid at times when the grid has a need for electricity. So they would be somebody who might build a solar system or a battery system, and then they'd feed that back to the grill at times when it was to the grid, excuse me, when it was desirable for the electric system. And there's a number of different cases that are out there. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on that right now. So just to get an idea of a possible arbitrage, if your electric bill is a plain flat electric bill in New York, you're going to pay about 16 cents. But if you switch to time of use rates, you pay 2 cents, 2.5 cents at night for the electricity. So again, this is a hypothetical case. If you charge a battery at night for 2.5 cents and then use it when your electric rates are higher, there should be some savings for you. So we took a look at that, and we took an approximate amount of electricity that would be used by an apartment. We said approximately 16.5 kilowatts. We scarfed that off of an electric bill. And then we took a look at what you would pay if you were able to charge that amount of electricity at 2.5 cents and then use it when the rate would have been 16 cents. So to get to the bottom line is the answer, which is always the answer, is it depends. So when we went and looked at the cost of different battery systems, those seem to vary quite a bit. So if you can get a cheaper system, you're able to save money. If you have to buy a more expensive system, it doesn't necessarily work out in your favor. So a time of use arbitrage, the jury still seems to be out whether that's appropriate for an individual to take advantage of. Another arbitrage probably isn't really the right term. It's called peak shaving, and this was also shown in the example with the chillers. What you want to be able to, because Con Ed charges a very high peak rate, you can use the battery to reduce your peak. So, and these peak rates are a very significant portion of the cost. It's actually here, the peak rate in the case of this particular bill is $350 on a $500 bill. So that's like 2/3 of the bill. So if we can reduce that peak rate, and it's easy for us to calculate that, we see the number of kilowatts and the cost per kilowatt hour. So it's pretty easy for us to see how to reduce that peak charge, right? So we know that we know what it is for this amount. And if we can reduce the peak by a certain amount, we can see that $350 go down. So this is just to get an idea of that. Again, it really is a summer example where you have a very high peak during a certain point of the day. So you would charge the battery in the middle of the night when you're not really using any electricity. You'd probably raise this line up, and then you discharge it when you have the peaks over here. And then you should be able to flatten this line. So if you can flatten your peak from 4 kilowatt hours to 2.5 kilowatt hours, you could save $150 on a $500 electric bill. So for the kind of buildings that have, or the kind of facilities that have that peak charge, there's significant savings. Again, this peak charge primarily applies to industrial facilities, or in an apartment building, it would apply to the common area of the apartment building. So that's peak shaving. We're going to go on to the next area, which is safety and sustainability and environment. So again, there's a lot of different risks associated with batteries, and we primarily focus on 2 of these risks. We focus on fire risk, which has been in the news quite a bit. And then we also focus on the risks of disposal and reuse. To a lesser degree, I just wanted to mention grid resilience and readiness, because to install those larger systems, the battery systems are either kind of very small and apply to your apartment, or they're really large and apply to the grid. So in the case of the larger systems, we want to really be able to mentioned that there's a risk that the grid isn't ready for those facilities. And the reason I put it in, there were recent articles for other areas of the world in Europe where the grid literally wasn't ready to take back all of the energy that those countries were producing. This happened in Portugal and Denmark. Okay, so just quickly to run down how all the regulations play out. Federal really doesn't regulate. The EPA puts out some simple guidelines that are then used by states and municipalities to frame out their regulations. So, you know, they kind of say you should have, they say some very high level things about what you have, and then the states and localities would use that for their regulations. The big regulator of electrical is the Underwriters Laboratory, and they specify all of the they specify how things are meant to be built so that they're safe. It goes from your toaster to also to these batteries and also to solar equipment. New York State doesn't do a lot of regulation per se. It uses the Underwriters Lab as the basis for its safety protocols. And New York State, through NYSERDA and so forth, has been very much focused on encouraging renewables. Then the two big areas in New York City that are involved with safety are the Department of Buildings and the Fire Department. And the Fire Department actually does testing before things, the way it is now for some of the larger systems to be installed in apartments and offices, they have to be tested by the Fire Department before they're installed. And then the Department of Buildings also does a site certification of these larger systems before they can be turned on. So, and then the owners apply to the Department of Buildings, and the building department comes down and certify these. They've been working very recently, as recently as October, on streamlining this. One is to allow smaller standardized UL certified products to be installed without the inspection. This applies really to portable and to 1- and 2-family homes. They have streamlined the process for larger systems, but there's still a significant amount of regulatory work to be done when you get these things installed. Next. Okay, so as far as fire risk, we have to call it as mixed. So the primary technologies, the lithium ion and the more recent lithium ion phosphate, both have a risk of what's called thermal runaway. Thermal runaway means that the heat from the fire can cause other modules to also catch fire. So the risk of that is high, very high with the lithium ion and somewhat higher with the lithium phosphate. But the good news is, even though there's the fire risk, there have been a lot less fires as the number of installations has ramped up. So the industry has worked very, very hard to improve the safety of these things, which we'll see on the chart on the next page. The vendors and installers have made very big strides in implementing safety protocols. So they're working very hard on that. They've included fire suppression equipment, which the fire department has actually demanded of them, notification facilities to isolate all of the batteries, and ensuring that they're built to standards. The newer technologies are emerging and they are much safer. They have little or no fire risk. The only problem is they're just not quite here yet. So this is just to show how the fire risk has been reduced in the last, whatever this is, 7 or 8 years. So there were almost no installations in 2018, but there were 16 fires. So, and this curve has stayed close to flat, even though the number of installations has gone up astronomically. So I think the safety has improved, even though the risk is there. So I think we have to, we'll have to decide collectively, where to go with this. the industry is running ahead. So this is just a one particular vendor that focused on safety, and they built a specialized set of containers that keep the batteries sufficiently separate to avoid thermal runaway. And they're up in Buffalo, New York. They're using the older technology, the lithium ion, and they've encapsulated the individual batteries in a way that's meant to prevent this thermal runaway. So this is just an example of one vendor that's done that. They've also, because we know the federal government has taken the subsidies, they've also been approved based on the content of their product to continue subsidies going forward. And this is the other risk that we spoke about is the recycling and the environmental risks of disposing of the batteries. So this particular vendor, what they've done is created second use for auto batteries. Auto batteries have to maintain a very high level of charge in order to be effective in the automobile, but the level of charge that can be used for storage for other industrial uses doesn't have to be as high. So they built a cabinet that can contain the auto batteries. It's not been approved in New York City, but it has been approved outside of New York City for industrial uses. Probably the best industrial use is a company that has a fleet of autos and then can have this battery resident in their facility. They don't have to pay for shipping these things. So there's some opportunities out there for different folks in industry to take advantage of this. End-of-life recycling is something we want to see. The materials are expensive to mine, and we want to make sure those are reused. This was something we did not, we left that as out of scope, and maybe that's a good topic for one of the next capstones. Okay, so I think you're going to go on to the next.
So we wanted to get a sense for the state of batteries in New York State and New York City. So we used GIS analysis to take a look at kind of what's out there currently. Some of these patterns emerged that essentially, looking at large scale batteries first. So these are the bulk energy utility connected battery installs. There's a lot of them in Staten Island, some in the outer boroughs, some in Brooklyn and Queens, and none in Manhattan. This kind of checks out, right? You need an empty lot. You need an industrially zoned area, ideally, so you're not putting this right next to homes. There has been some community backlash, especially in Staten Island, where people are feeling like there's something fire prone getting installed right next to houses, and that's been unpopular. So this kind of corroborated a lot of our research and led us to believe that community outreach is important, but also Manhattan is one of the most congested parts of our grid, and it's being underserved because it needs batteries. It's just that they're not getting in there yet. So that's a focus area of ours. Similarly, small scale batteries, we looked at basically these are home connected to residential solar when someone wants a battery backup as an option as well. These increase in density as you approach the city and then drop off immediately as soon as you enter within the boundaries of New York City. This is a direct reflection of the regulatory environment as it stood up until October this year. So as Barry mentioned, the Department of Buildings and Fire Department did a complete overhaul of the city's regulations and released those rules in October. So there's very recent progress happening on this, but basically what those rules do, among other things, they smooth out the regulatory pathway towards battery installation. They make the rules more clear and standardized, but they also pave the way for at least single family homes, 1 to 2 unit homes to start installing smaller scale batteries connected to solar that are, as long as they're UL listed, they're accepted. So this is a trend that potentially will start to reverse soon. So focusing in on the neighborhood around our campus, as part of the Harlem Community Energy System, we explored a couple of different possibilities for a storage cooperative. So what we really want to do here is take the benefits. I mean, there's developers who are already installing these batteries, like you see on this slide. They're doing this because it's profitable, not for fun. So there's money in this, and we want to figure out how can we get the benefits, both financial and resilience and sustainability wise, and distribute those equitably within the community. So we reviewed two major options as far as how to do that. There's essentially option one, which is a front of meter system. This is the bulk energy, large scale type system that many stakeholders would potentially own or own stakes in this larger centralized system. Or alternatively, we also explored a behind the meter option, which would be a much more distributed situation. So many buildings would either install something on the building or even on apartment units and aggregate those together and participate in a virtual power plant in order to access these same benefits. First, we're going to take a look at option one. This is essentially modeled after New York's highly successful community solar programs, where similarly a solar farm gets built by a developer and then people around the city subscribe to it and therefore own like a partial stake in it. This is an example of an installation that a company called 9dot has done in the Bronx. So they did focus on community outreach. They partnered with the local school and did this muraling on the side of it. So this is an example of, placing it somewhere carefully and thoughtfully that didn't seem to have as much community backlash. Benefits of this system. So basically, you're buying in bulk here. You're going to get all the financial benefits of basically getting a drop-in plug-and-play system that gets literally brought in on a truck, plopped down on a cement pad. This is the cheapest form of battery that you can get. It also buys you direct access to the full revenue stack that Barry outlined earlier. So this is all of the stuff beyond just arbitrage, which tends to not quite get you there. It does offset costs some, but what really makes these projects profitable for the developers is these revenue programs through Con Ed, which they will lock in a rate for you for 10 years. So that's how you can get financial backing. You basically get guaranteed a payout for providing grid services. And the idea here is that it would be community owned, and the grid value, instead of flowing out to some developers or some investors from wherever, that value gets captured and kept within the community. There are challenges to this idea, obviously. So siting is the biggest one. You just need to find the appropriate spot. Currently, the regulations are that it can't be stacked at all. It has to be a single story, it has to go on an empty lot, and it has to have significant setbacks away from other properties. Also, from just a community sensitivity standpoint, we would not want to locate this anywhere residential. So, that kind of narrows it down to very, very few places around Harlem. The other real concern is significant upfront costs. So with this system, obviously, you got to buy it all at once. And there's a significant chance that, you may or may not be able to find that funding. You also are dependent on a developer partner. So you'd be knocking on doors and asking if people would be down. We floated the idea when we were doing interviews. And we did get a bit of a well, cool, that sounds cool, good luck kind of response. So in light of that, we still identified a few potential locations that this could go. We nominate the City College of New York as a potential host. Word on the street is that there's a few underutilized areas around the campus, perhaps near the ASRC and the newer part of the campus that can't be used for anything else. And potentially this would be a great way for our campus to give back to the neighborhood. Columbia University would also probably be willing. We also identified a couple of municipally owned places, which probably could make it easier. So there's the wastewater treatment plant up on the water by Riverside State Park. That would be a potential challenge because this can't be in a flood zone, obviously, so you need to elevate it. It's a multi-story facility, so there's potential there. And there's also an MTA bus depot on 133rd that appears to have potential space as well. And again, that's like already a kind of ugly, loud, noisy thing that has concrete walls around it. So the community backlash risk is mitigated there. We outlined a basic financial model for this. You're basically taking the revenue from these different programs that Con Edison and New York ISO offer. And a lot of that obviously goes back into operating costs, paying back a lease, paying the developer for ongoing maintenance, et cetera. But hopefully there would be some net revenue left after that to spread back into community benefits, including potential energy burden relief program, resilience hubs, and workforce training to bring people into this and help maintain this. So that said, there is option 2, which is intriguing. So looking at that, we're talking about basically much smaller battery systems. This is either basically landlord scale, which you see a picture here. This would go alongside the meters in buildings, or it could even be tenant scale. And that would look something like the case study I'm going to show you in a second, but like a much smaller, like portable power bank type situation. And the cool thing about these is that they are many, many tiny things that you can buy over time. So instead of needing financing and huge amounts of upfront capital, people can slowly buy into the program over time. So the revenue streams, you would basically access those same revenue streams as if you were a large battery or a power plant by being a virtual power plant. That's possible through the magic of the internet. You network these devices together, and essentially a third-party software solution aggregates them into one thing that can work as basically something that Con Edison views as worth their while. A potential partner we have identified is Grid Rewards, which is, well, it's actually a company called Logical Buildings. They have an app called Grid Rewards. You can download it today and play with it next summer. It'll tell you when to turn stuff off and participate in demand response events when the grid is strained on like hot summer days, essentially. Or Responsible Grid is another potential partner who could offer this, and they are a case study, so I'll talk about them in a second. There are challenges here too. You do need that VPP partner, so that cuts into your potential financial returns to your community stakeholders. Also, although startup costs are low, like I said, you still have to reach a critical mass. So you need like a certain size chunk upfront at least, just in terms of the number of people participating, so that you can break that threshold and access those revenue streams from Con Edison. The other elephant in the room is obviously now we're considering fire risk. So these batteries need to be either certified for indoor use or mounted to the exterior of the building, potentially on the roof. And so that becomes another consideration as we learn about structural limitations from the earlier team. That applies here as well. So we're going to look at a case study for this. This is crazy because it's something that is already happening. It happened, they did their first pilot last summer. And so this company called Responsible Grid is doing a networked solution where basically this is a Blue Eddy power station. It's an LFP battery, so it's the reduced fire risk one, and it's a UL certified product. But they distributed these to over 100 participants and hooked up their air conditioners. For some reason for this picture, I guess they wanted to make it pretty, but they hid the cord behind. It would be plugged in, obviously. So what this does is essentially it charges itself when off peak, so probably overnight or something. And then during demand response events, which would be like, in the afternoon on a hot summer day when the grid starts to be constrained, everyone's turning on their ACs, and we're either going to fire up the peaker plants, which are going to be belching out terrible fumes and emissions into neighborhoods, or the alternative is get people to turn stuff off. What this does, which is super cool, is that you don't have to turn off your AC anymore. It just automatically switches the power from the wall to the battery and starts running your AC off of the battery. And it's like, okay, well, maybe this battery is big enough to run for 30 minutes, 45 minutes? Is that really going to make a difference? And the answer is, well, when you have hundreds of people doing this, you can cascade them, you can stagger them. So yes, absolutely, it makes a difference. So yeah, this one was super interesting to us because while the Department of Buildings and the fire department are like working night and day for years to finalize the regulations for everything, these just kind of like swooped right in under the radar because they're just like a plug and play consumer product, for better or for worse. We are very wary of other companies coming in and doing something similar, but with cheaper equipment or something. And we don't want to condone that necessarily. But if you can if you can do due diligence and be confident that this is not a fire risk, then this is a potential solution, and it's the most accessible solution that we've encountered. Very worth noting is that low-income participants engaged in this pilot and didn't have to pay any upfront cost. So this is a model that we're really interested in. We went on to identify a few potential funding partners. We recommend that the Clinton Foundation, Bloomberg Foundation, or Citizens Energy. The Clinton is actually local to our neighborhood. They're headquartered right up here in Harlem. They have a background in sustainable investment, and they may be interested in getting involved in such a project. So as part of our capstone, we've drafted a letter, Barry drafted a letter, reaching out to get them involved. So yeah, to sum things up, we identified that battery storage systems, energy storage systems in general, are a completely essential aspect of getting renewables onto the grid. The sun only shines during the day, the wind is blowing sometimes, not always. So you need to be able to store that energy and release it. And like Barry said, now that these things have dropped in cost so much, it's actually viable to literally store the energy and make it become a base load energy source. That 24/7 system was financially viable. That means it's cheaper than anything else, which is kind of insane. We identified that this can bring significant value to a community energy system, such as the one for Harlem. Basically, in terms of technology, while there are very promising options around the corner, some of them have been promising being a year away for a few years, and we don't want to wait for things. The climate emergency is that, it's an emergency. So we do need to figure out ways to use the technologies available right now to decarbonize our grid. So with that said, lithium iron phosphate, it's there. There's ways to make it safe. There's companies that are focusing on safety and have really great track records, and they're worth identifying and utilizing. And right, finally, if you look at arbitrage alone, you're going to scratch your head and be like, well, I'm going to be profiting negative $200. But that's where these revenue streams come in. You need to access the value stack from Con Edison, and that's why these projects are moving forward. Yeah, and finally, aggregation is the way to do that if you want to do it with smaller resources. So that's what we have today. Thanks so much, you guys. And any questions?